In the storm-lashed barrens of the New Mexico territory, a widowed rancher was about to seal her barn against the wind. What started as a routine check on her horses took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a wounded outlaw's horse, collapsing at her feet. Clara Doyle wasn't your typical frontier widow. For 10 harsh years, she had run her ranch alone since her husband's mysterious death, known in the county for her fierce independence and sharper aim. When she encountered the injured beast dragging a half-conscious rider through her barn doors, she had no idea she was inviting death into her home. Clara's decision to save the outlaw, Jace Colton, would lead to a night of blood, buried truths, and the arrival of a gang that believed she owed them her husband's debts. What began as an act of mercy would become a stand for survival. The Doyle Ranch would never be the same after Clara dared to defy the infamous Preacher's gang. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert winds howled like vengeful spirits driving sand and debris against the weathered planks of Clara Doyle's ranch house. She moved with practiced efficiency, muscles tensed against the growing fury of the storm. At 38, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of a woman who had learned to expect little and prepare for worse. The New Mexico territory had never been kind to widows, and the past year had taught her just how quickly kindness could evaporate like morning dew under the merciless sun. "Hold fast," Clara muttered, driving another nail into the wooden plank covering her kitchen window. The hammer felt natural in her grip, calloused palms evidence of work that had once been her husband's. She paused, listening to the rattling shutters and the distant, mournful creak of the barn door. Matthew would have secured that door hours ago, would have checked the horses twice by now. Matthew would have... Clara shook away the thought. Matthew wasn't here. He hadn't been for 8 months, 3 weeks and 4 days, and dwelling on what he would have done served no purpose except to deepen the hollow ache beneath her ribs. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the sparse kitchen with its harsh, white glare. In that flash, Clara caught sight of her reflection in the cracked mirror hanging by the door, hair escaping its tight bun, lines of exhaustion carved around her eyes, a smudge of dirt across one cheek. She hardly recognized herself anymore. Sometimes that felt like a mercy. The wind changed direction, hurling rain against the north side of the house. Clara grabbed her oilskin coat and lantern, bracing herself for the dash to the barn. She couldn't lose another animal, not with the ranch teetering on financial collapse. "Damn you, Matthew," she whispered, the words familiar on her tongue as she stepped out into the storm's fury. The distance to the barn stretched before her like a gauntlet. Rain slashed sideways, soaking her despite the heavy coat. Mud sucked at her boots, threatening to pull them from her feet with each determined step. The lantern's flame flickered dangerously behind its glass cage, barely cutting through the darkness. Inside the barn, Clara secured the door behind her, shoulders sagging momentarily with relief. The familiar smells of hay, horses, and leather embraced her. 2 horses, all that remained of what had once been a respectable herd, nickered softly in their stalls. "Easy now," she soothed, moving to check on them. "Just a storm. We've weathered worse, haven't we?" The older mare, Pepper, pushed her, velvet nose against Clara's palm. The animal's steady presence had been a comfort during those first terrible months after Matthew's death, when Clara would slip into the barn at midnight, sink down into the straw, and finally allow herself to cry. Clara had just finished securing loose tack when she heard it, a sound distinct from the storm's chaos, a labored whinny followed by the uneven rhythm of hoofbeats. She froze, one hand instinctively reaching for the rifle she kept mounted on. The wall. The barn door rattled, then burst open with a violent gust. Rain and wind swept in, along with the massive heaving form of a horse Clara didn't recognize. The animal staggered 3 steps inside before its legs buckled, sending its rider tumbling to the ground. Clara raised her lantern, rifle now gripped firmly in her other hand. The rider lay motionless, face down in the straw. Blood darkened the back of his coat. Too much blood. "Mister?" Her voice sounded thin against the storm's roar. "Can you hear me?" No response. Clara approached cautiously, nudging the stranger's shoulder with the toe of her boot. When he didn't stir, she crouched beside him, rifle still at the ready, and rolled him onto his back. A man in his mid-30s, features obscured by several days' growth of beard, and a mask of trail dust turned to mud by the rain. His breathing came shallow and rapid, face contorted with pain, even in unconsciousness. One hand still clutched weakly at the revolver on his hip. Clara pried the weapon from his fingers, tucking it into her own belt. She'd seen bullet wounds before. Matthew had come home with one once, refusing to explain how he'd gotten it, and recognized the signs. The pallor beneath the grime, the way his shirt clung to his torso, dark and wet, with more than just rainwater. The horse that had carried him whickered pitifully, drawing Clara's attention. The animal stood trembling, head hanging low, a long gash visible on its right flank. It had clearly pushed itself beyond exhaustion to reach shelter. "You poor creature," Clara murmured, momentarily setting aside her rifle to run a gentle hand along the horse's neck. "You've carried him far, haven't you?" Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the barn. In that stark moment of clarity, Clara noticed the brand on the horse's saddle, a twisted cross with a circle at its center. Something about the symbol struck a chord of recognition, tugging at memories she couldn't quite place. The wounded man groaned, shifting slightly. Clara faced a choice. The sensible thing would be to leave him in the barn, ride for the town of Broken Cross at first light, and let Deputy Reeve handle whatever trouble this stranger had brought to her doorstep. A man with a bullet in him and a horse ridden to exhaustion wasn't running from anything good, but dawn was hours away, and the storm showed no signs of abating. The man would likely be dead by morning if left untended. Matthew's voice seemed to whisper from the shadows. "We don't turn away the desperate, Clara girl. That's not who we are." "That's not who we were," Clara replied to the ghost of her husband, "before I knew what you'd done." A vivid memory surfaced. Matthew, in the final weeks of his life, huddled over account books late into the night, drinking more heavily than usual. His nervous glances toward the window whenever hoofbeats sounded on the road. The whispered argument she'd overheard between Matthew and a man whose voice she didn't recognize. Harsh words about debts and consequences. "Clara girl," Matthew had said the morning before his death, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for hers across the breakfast table. "If anything happens to me, you sell this place. You hear? Take what you can get and go back east to your sister." She dismissed his words as melodrama, the product of too much whiskey and too many sleepless nights. 2 days later, they'd found his body at the bottom of Widow's Canyon, his neck broken from the fall. The town called it an accident, a reasonable man caught in an unreasonable storm, his horse spooked by lightning. Clara had never believed it. The wounded man's breath hitched, pulling her back to the present. She made her decision, setting the lantern down on a hay bale. "Don't you die on me, stranger," she muttered, bending to hook her arms under his shoulders. "I've enough ghosts haunting this place already." Dragging him to the house was brutal. Work. Twice she nearly lost her grip as mud threatened to swallow them both. By the time she managed to get him through the door and onto the floor before the hearth, Clara's muscles screamed in protest, her lungs burning with exertion. She built up the fire, its warm light revealing more details of her unwelcome guest. Beneath the dirt and blood, his face held a certain hardness. Not cruelty precisely, but the weathered look of a man who had seen much and forgotten little of it. His clothes were trail-worn, but of decent quality. A gold ring glinted on his right hand, not a wedding band, but something with an insignia she couldn't make out. Clara cut away his shirt, revealing the wound. A bullet had torn through his left side. By some miracle, it appeared to have passed clean through without hitting anything vital. Still, he'd lost blood, and the wound edges showed angry signs of infection beginning to set in. As she cleaned and dressed the injury with practiced hands, Clara's thoughts drifted back to that brand on the saddle. Where had she seen it before? Something in Matthew's papers, perhaps? After his death, she'd found a locked box containing documents she couldn't make sense of, correspondence with men whose names meant nothing to her, figures that aligned with no legitimate business she knew of. The stranger stirred as she pressed, a whiskey-soaked cloth against the wound, his hand suddenly gripping her wrist with surprising strength. His eyes flew open, alert, intense, and the deepest blue she'd ever seen. "Where?" he rasped, then broke into a cough. "You're at the Doyle Ranch," Clara replied, keeping her voice steady despite the painful grip on her wrist. "Your horse brought you here half dead. I suggest you let go of me unless you're keen on finishing the job yourself." Something flickered. In those blue eyes, calculation, perhaps, or recognition. After a long moment, his fingers relaxed their hold. "Doyle," he repeated, the name seeming to carry weight beyond simple acknowledgement. Matthew Doyle's place? Clara's heartbeat quickened. "Matthew's dead. Has been for some time. I'm his widow." The stranger closed his eyes briefly, an unreadable expression crossing his features. "I'm sorry to hear that, Ma'am." "I doubt that very much," Clara said, resuming her work on his wound. "But I appreciate the courtesy of the lie." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before pain overtook him again. "Name's Jace," he managed through gritted teeth. "Jace Colton." Clara's fingers stilled momentarily. The name meant nothing to her, and yet there was something in the way he'd offered it, as if testing her reaction. "Well, Mr. Colton," she said, tying off the bandage with perhaps more force than necessary, "whoever put that bullet in you will have to wait their turn. You're not dying in my house tonight." Outside, the storm continued its assault on the small ranch house, wind shrieking through every crack and crevice. Clara moved to the window, peering out into darkness that revealed nothing. Dawn would come eventually, and with it decisions that couldn't be postponed. For now she had a wounded man at her hearth, a strange horse in her barn, and the unsettling feeling that Matthew's secrets, the ones that had died with him at the bottom of Widow's Canyon, had somehow found their way home. Clara woke with a start, her neck stiff from sleeping upright in the wooden chair. The fire had died to embers, casting the room in a dull orange glow. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. Why was she sleeping in the chair instead of her bed? Then her gaze fell on the man lying on her floor, and memory rushed back with the force of floodwater. Jace Colton lay where she'd left him, though his position had shifted. No longer flat on his back, but curled slightly on his uninjured side, one hand tucked beneath the blanket she'd thrown over him. Clara stood slowly, muscles protesting the movement after hours of stillness. Dawn light filtered weakly through the covered windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie quiet, broken only by the steady drip of water from the eaves. She moved silently to the stove, stoking it to life. Years of rising before Matthew had trained her to move through their home like a ghost, disturbing nothing. Now those same skills served a different purpose as she watched the wounded man from the corner of her eye. His breathing had steadied overnight. The fever she'd feared hadn't materialized, suggesting the whiskey she'd used to clean the wound had done its work. Clara filled the coffee pot and set it to boil, then reached for her rifle, propped against the wall, where she could reach it quickly. "You won't be needing that, Ma'am." The voice was rough with sleep and pain, but carried a note of wry amusement. "Least not yet." Clara turned, rifle in hand, but not quite aimed. Jace Colton had pushed himself up to sitting, back against the stone hearth. His face was drawn with pain, but his eyes, those startling blue eyes, were clear and alert, far too alert for Clara's comfort. "That remains to be seen," she replied evenly. "How's the wound?" Jace glanced down at his bandaged side, visible beneath the blanket that had slipped to his waist. "Still attached to the rest of me, thanks to you. You've done this before." It wasn't a question. Clara moved to the cupboard, taking down 2 tin cups without answering. The silence stretched between them, neither comfortable nor entirely hostile, a waiting kind of quiet. "My husband came home shot once," she said finally, pouring the coffee. "Wouldn't say how it happened. Wouldn't let me fetch the doctor either." She handed him a cup, careful to maintain distance between them. Jace took it with a nod of thanks, his fingers brushing hers briefly. His hands were calloused in different places than Matthew's had been, not a rancher's hands. "And you patched him up?" Jace said. "I did." Clara settled back into her chair, rifle balanced across her lap. "Now it's your turn to talk, Mr. Colton. What brings a man with a bullet hole to my doorstep in the middle of a storm?" Jace sipped his coffee, eyes never leaving hers. "Bad luck and good intentions, ma'am. Got caught in a disagreement over a card game in Santa Fe. Other fellow thought I was cheating. I wasn't." He shrugged, then winced at the movement. "Man can't shoot straight when he's drunk, thankfully. Grazed me instead of killing me outright." The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. Clara had lived with Matthew Doyle long enough to recognize the smooth delivery of a man accustomed to bending truth like wire. She'd seen the wound, clean entry, and exit through flesh. Not the messy tear of a drunken shot fired in anger, but the calculated work of someone who knew exactly where to aim. "That's so," she said, letting skepticism color her tone. "And you rode all this way bleeding rather than finding a doctor in Santa Fe?" "Man who shot me has friends there, Sheriff, among them." Jace offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Seemed wiser to put some distance between us." Clara met his gaze steadily. "You're a long way from Santa Fe, Mr. Colton." "Just Jace, please." "And yes, I am." He glanced around the room, taking in details with quick, assessing looks. "You said this is the Doyle Ranch, Matthew Doyle's place." "Was," Clara corrected. "Now it's mine." She set her coffee down, suddenly restless. "I need to check on your horse. You stay put." "Yes, ma'am," Jace replied with a hint of that same wry humor. As she reached the door, he added, "His name's Rebel. He's a good horse. Saved my life more than once." Something in his tone made Clara pause, hand on the doorknob. A softness when he spoke of the animal, at odds with the guarded calculation in the rest of his speech. It reminded her, unexpectedly, of Matthew in their early days, the gentle way he'd handled nervous colts, so different from his dealings with men. "I'll see to him," she said, and stepped outside. The morning air was clean and cool after the storm. The vast New Mexico sky swept clear of clouds. Puddles dotted the yard, reflecting perfect fragments of blue. Clara took a moment just to breathe, grateful for the momentary solitude. The stranger inside her home had thrown her carefully constructed routine into disarray, and with it the emotional walls she'd built around Matthew's memory. In the barn, the horses greeted her with soft nickers. Jace's mount, Rebel, looked better than he had the night before, though still clearly exhausted. The wound on his flank wasn't as deep as she'd feared in the dim lantern light. "You carried him far," she murmured, running her hand along the animal's neck. "Further than Santa Fe, I'd wager." Clara turned her attention to the saddle she'd removed last night, examining it more carefully in daylight. The leather was well worn, but quality craftsmanship. Saddlebags hung heavy with what felt like ammunition when she prodded them. And there, on the cantle, that brand she'd glimpsed in the lightning flash, a twisted cross inside a circle burned deep into the leather. Something nagged at her memory again. Clara had seen that symbol before. She was certain of it. When Matthew died, she'd found a locked box hidden beneath the floorboards of their bedroom. Inside were papers, letters, figures, maps, with routes marked in red ink and several wanted posters. She'd studied them obsessively in those first grief-stricken weeks, searching for any explanation of who her husband had truly been. Eventually, she'd hidden them away again, the knowledge too painful to confront daily. Leaving the barn, Clara made her way to the small storage shed where she'd relocated the box, away from the house and the ghost of Matthew that haunted every corner of it. Her hands remembered the combination to the lock, even as her mind tried to shy away from what she might find. The box was where she'd left it, undisturbed beneath sacks of seed corn. Clara opened it with trembling fingers, rifling through the contents until she found what she sought, a stack of wanted posters, yellowed with age. She leafed through them hurriedly, scanning the faces until her breath caught. The man was younger in the drawing, clean-shaven with shorter hair, but the eyes were unmistakable. Wanted, Jace Colton, member of the preacher's gang. Reward $500 for capture, dead or alive. Charged with robbery, assault, murder. Below the stark text was that same twisted cross symbol. Clara sat back on her heels, poster clutched in her hand. The man in her house, sleeping by her hearth, drinking her coffee, was a killer. A member of the notorious preacher's gang that had terrorized parts of the territory for years, and Matthew had kept his wanted poster hidden away. Clara tucked the poster into her skirt pocket and closed the box, mind racing. She should ride. For town immediately, alert Deputy Reeve. Yet something held her back, the same questions that had haunted her since Matthew's death. What connection had her husband had to these men? What secrets had died with him? Jace Colton might be her only chance to learn the truth. By the time Clara returned to the house, Jace had managed to get himself onto a chair at the kitchen table. He'd found his shirt, or what remained of it, and had pulled it on despite the bloodstains and torn fabric. His revolver, which Clara had placed on the high shelf above the stove, was conspicuously absent from that spot. She didn't need to look to know he'd found it. "Rebel's looking better," she said, closing the door behind her. "The cut isn't deep. With rest, he'll heal fine." Relief crossed Jace's features, genuine enough to seem almost vulnerable. "Thank you for tending to him. He's been with me a long time." Clara moved to the stove, keeping her back to him as she busied herself with breakfast preparations. The wanted poster felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. Every instinct screamed danger, yet she couldn't help but notice how Jace's eyes had lingered on Matthew's old hat hanging by the door, the slight tension in his shoulders when he'd spotted the carved wooden box on the mantel where Matthew had kept his tobacco. "You knew my husband," Clara said abruptly, turning to face him. Not a question. Jace's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a barely perceptible bracing, as if for impact. "What makes you say that?" "The way you keep looking at his things, like you've seen them before." Clara kept her voice steady, though her heart hammered in her chest. "And the way you said his name last night. You knew Matthew Doyle." A long moment passed. Clara could almost see the calculations running behind those blue eyes, weighing truths against lies, determining how much to reveal. "Yes," he finally said. "I knew Matt long time ago." "How?" Clara pressed. Jace's fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the table. "We rode together for a spell. Before he settled down, before he met you, I'd guess." Clara absorbed this, connecting it to the fragments she already knew. Matthew had come from somewhere east, with money enough to buy the ranch outright. He'd never spoken much about his past, and she'd never pushed, drawn more to the future he promised than the history he carried. "He never mentioned you," she said. A humorless smile touched Jace's lips. "I expect not. Matt was good at compartmentalizing." "Is that what you call it?" Clara couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "I called it lying." Jace studied her, something like understanding dawning in his expression. "You didn't know who he was before. He never told you." "No." Clara turned back to the stove, needing the distraction of movement. Not until it was too late. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Clara cracked eggs into a pan with more force than necessary, the familiar routine of cooking a poor shield against the turmoil inside her. Part of her wanted to demand everything this man knew about Matthew, every secret, every sin. Another part feared those very answers. "How did he die?" Jace asked quietly. Clara kept her eyes on the pan. "Fell from his horse into Widow's Canyon, broke his neck. They say it was an accident. Spooked horse, bad weather." She paused. "I never believed that." "No," Jace agreed softly. "Matt was too good a rider." The simple acknowledgement, the first time anyone had validated her doubt, loosened something in Clara's chest. She set 2 plates on the table and took the seat opposite him. "Tell me something true about him," she said. "Something real." Jace considered this, fork hovering over his eggs. He could play the harmonica. Not well, mind you, drove the rest of us half mad with his caterwauling, but he loved it. A genuine smile touched his eyes, and he had this superstition about his boots, always put the right one on first, said his mother taught him that. Right foot forward into the day means you'll walk the straight path. The detail struck Clara with unexpected force. She'd seen Matthew do exactly that every morning, right boot first, always, but never knew the reason. Such a small thing, yet somehow more intimate than grand declarations or passionate embraces. A window into the man she'd never fully known. They ate in silence for a time, the weight of Matthew's ghost gradually settling between them. Clara watched Jace covertly, searching his face for any sign of deception. What she saw instead was weariness, pain, and something harder to define. A kind of resigned determination. "You're not running from a card game," she said at last, "and that bullet wasn't put in you by a drunk." Jace set down his fork, meeting her gaze directly. "No, ma'am, it wasn't." "Are you going to tell me the truth?" "Some of it," he replied with unexpected candor. "Not all. For your safety as much as mine." Clara leaned back, folding her arms across her chest. "I've been looking after my own safety since before you showed up bleeding on my doorstep, Mr. Colton. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Fair enough." He pushed his plate away. "I was part of a job that went wrong. People got hurt who shouldn't have. I disagreed with how things were handled, and my associates took exception to my position." "Associates?" Clara repeated flatly. "You mean the preacher's gang?" If Jace was surprised by her knowledge, he hid it well. Only a tightening around his eyes betrayed any reaction. "You've heard of them, then?" "Enough." Clara didn't mention the poster burning a hole in her pocket. "They say Silas Maddox fancies himself a man of God while robbing and killing across 3 territories. Silas has his own understanding of divine justice," Jace said dryly. "It tends to benefit Silas most of all." The casual way he spoke the gang leader's name confirmed what Clara already suspected. Jace wasn't just some fringe member. He rode close to Maddox himself. "And now these associates of yours, they're looking for you?" Clara asked. "Yes." Jace's expression hardened. "Which is why I should be moving on today. I've brought enough trouble to your door already." Clara studied the man before her. A killer, if the poster was to be believed. An outlaw, certainly. Yet something about his manner, The genuine care for his horse, the way he spoke of Matthew, suggested complexities beyond the stark black and white of wanted posters, and he was her link to understanding what had happened to Matthew, why her husband had died with secrets and debts that continued to haunt her. "You're not going anywhere today," she said firmly. "That wound needs at least another day of rest before you put it back in a saddle. Besides, your horse needs recovery time." Jace frowned. "Mrs. Doyle." "Clara," she corrected. "Clara," he amended. "You don't understand the risk. These men, they won't hesitate to hurt you if they find me here." "I understand risk perfectly." "Well, Mr. Colton, I've been living with it since the day they brought my husband's body home." Clara stood, gathering the plates. "One more day, then you can go your way." Jace watched her with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been admiration. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most foolhardy." "I'm neither," Clara replied, turning away to hide, the tremor in her hands. "I'm just tired of living with questions no one will answer." Later, as Clara redressed his wound, she noted how the angry red around the edges had already begun to fade. His body was strong, accustomed to healing quickly from injury, the kind of resilience that came from a life where wounds were common. "Matthew kept your wanted poster," she said abruptly, fingers steady as she applied fresh bandaging. "In a locked box with other papers, letters, maps, figures that made no sense to me." Jace went still beneath her hands. "When?" "After he died. I found it." Clara secured the bandage, then sat back, finally meeting his eyes. There were other posters too, all members of the preacher's gang, all with that same brand, the twisted cross. She watched understanding dawn on his face. She knew exactly who and what he was. "Yet you didn't send for the sheriff," Jace observed quietly. "No." Clara stood, gathering the old bandages. "Not yet." "Why?" She paused at the door, considering her answer. "Because dead men don't leave explanations, Mr. Colton, and I've had my fill of being left in the dark." The day passed in an uneasy truce. Clara tended to the ranch chores, feeding animals, mending fences damaged in the storm, checking on the small vegetable garden that supplemented her meager supplies. Jace remained inside, too weak still to be of help, though she sometimes felt his eyes on her through the window. As evening approached, Clara found herself in the barn again, brushing down Rebel after checking his wound. The rhythmic strokes of the brush against the horse's coat soothed her tangled thoughts. The wanted poster remained in her pocket, a constant reminder of the dangerous game she was playing. "I don't know what I'm doing," she confessed to the horse, who flicked an ear back as if listening. "Harboring an outlaw, keeping secrets from the law." Yet the alternative, sending Jace away without learning what he knew about Matthew, seemed impossible to bear. For 8 months, she'd lived with the crushing weight of uncertainty. If there was any chance of understanding why her husband had died, what shadows had followed him to his grave. A sound froze her in place, distant but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. Not a single rider, but several approaching from the east. Clara's heart stuttered in her chest. In the isolation of her ranch, visitors were rare enough to be remarkable. Multiple riders, coming at dusk, could only mean trouble. She moved to the barn door, peering out toward the road. The fading light cast long shadows across the land, making it difficult to discern details. But as she strained her eyes, Clara caught the silhouettes of riders cresting the rise that led to her property. 3 men, no, 4, moving with purpose. Clara ran toward the house, heart pounding. The uneasy peace she'd found was shattered, replaced by cold, spreading dread. She burst through the door to find Jace already on his feet, revolver in hand, face grim in the fading light. "They're coming," she said, the words barely audible over the roaring in her ears. 4 riders from the east. Jace moved to the window, keeping to the side as he peered out. What little color remained in his face drained away. "It's them," he said softly. "They've found me." The first golden rays of sunrise spilled across the horizon, painting the weathered ranch house in deceptive warmth. Clara stood at her kitchen window, fingers white-knuckled around a cup of coffee gone cold. She hadn't slept. How could she, knowing what morning would bring? Jace sat at her table, revolver disassembled before him as he methodically cleaned each piece. His movements were precise despite the pain that occasionally tightened his features. They'd argued late into the night about what to do, Clara insisting he leave before the others arrived, Jace adamant that running now would only endanger her more. "They already know I was here," he'd explained, voice low and urgent. "If I'm gone when they arrive, they'll assume you helped me escape. They'll make an example of you." Now, as dawn broke fully across the land, Clara watched 4 riders approach at an unhurried pace. Their confidence was more terrifying than any show of aggression might have been. They moved like men who expected no resistance, no consequences. "That's Silas in front," Jace said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "The tall one with the black hat." Clara studied the approaching figure. Even at a distance, something about the man commanded attention, the straight-backed posture, the controlled way he guided his mount. Beside him rode a younger man with a shock of sandy hair visible beneath his hat, leaning casually in his saddle, as if on a pleasure ride. "Calder," Jace identified, nodding toward the younger rider. "Watch yourself around him. He's unpredictable." "And the others?" "Just muscle. They follow orders." Jace finished reassembling his revolver with a final decisive click. "Remember what we discussed. Let me do the talking. Don't challenge Silas directly." Clara bristled at being instructed how to behave in her own home, but swallowed her pride. Survival first, pride later, if there was a later. The riders drew up before the house, dust billowing around stamping hooves. No one dismounted immediately. They were waiting, Clara realized, a power play, forcing her to come to them. "Stay inside," Jace murmured. "I'll go out." "This is my home," Clara replied, setting down her cup. "I'll not cower in it." Before he could argue, she moved to the door and stepped onto the porch, chin raised, one hand resting near the pocket where she'd hidden a small derringer, a precaution that felt woefully inadequate against 4 armed men. The rider in the black hat, Silas, studied her with cool appraisal. He was older than she'd expected, perhaps mid-40s, with silver threading through his dark beard. His eyes, though, those were ageless, pale as winter sky and just as merciless. "Mrs. Doyle, I presume." His voice carried the cadence of an educated man, at odds with his rough appearance. I'd know Matthew's taste anywhere. He always did appreciate quality. The casual reference to her husband, the appraising way Silas looked at her, Clara's skin crawled with indignation. Before she could respond, Jace appeared in the doorway behind her. "Silas," he acknowledged, posture deliberately casual despite the tension Clara could feel radiating from him. "Brother Jace." A thin smile crossed Silas's face. "We've been concerned for your welfare, riding off wounded, without a word to your family." He turned to the young man beside him. "Wasn't that discourteous of him, Calder?" The sandy-haired rider grinned, a flash of teeth beneath his mustache. "Downright ungrateful, I'd say, after all we've done for him." Clara felt Jace stiffen beside her, though his expression remained neutral. "I needed time to think. Recent events have weighed heavy on my mind." "Thinking is a dangerous pastime for men in our profession," Silas said mildly. "It tends to complicate arrangements that are best kept simple." He dismounted with fluid grace, approaching the porch steps. "But we can discuss such philosophical matters inside, can't we, Mrs. Doyle? The morning grows warm, and my men have ridden hard to find our wayward brother. It wasn't a request. Clara understood this as clearly as if he'd drawn his weapon. She stepped aside, gesturing toward the door with a mockery of hospitality. "Please," she said, ice in her tone. "Make yourselves at home." Silas smiled, a practiced expression that never reached those pale eyes. "You're most kind." Within minutes, Clara's small house had been invaded. Silas took Matthew's old chair by the fire as if it had been waiting for him. Calder prowled the room like a coyote, picking up objects, examining them, setting them down carelessly. The other two men positioned themselves by the doors, one at the front, one at the back. Guarding against escape, Clara realized with a chill. "Coffee, Mrs. Doyle?" Silas requested politely. "It's been a tiresome journey." Clara moved to the stove, grateful for something to do with her hands. Jace had positioned himself against the wall, arms crossed, watching Calder's movements, with barely concealed tension. "Quaint little place," Calder remarked, running his fingers along the mantel. "Bit isolated, though, must get lonely." His gaze slid to Clara, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "I prefer solitude to poor company," she replied evenly. Pouring coffee. Calder's eyes hardened, but Silas chuckled. "She has spirit, this one. I see why Matthew chose her." He accepted the cup Clara offered. "Thank you, my dear. Now to business." He turned to Jace. "Your sudden crisis of conscience has created quite the inconvenience, Brother Jace." Jace met his gaze steadily. "What happened in Silver Bluff wasn't what we agreed to. Those people weren't supposed to get hurt." "Plans evolve as circumstances dictate," Silas replied with a dismissive wave. "The Lord's work isn't always neat." "Don't bring the Lord into this," Jace said, voice low. "What happened there wasn't divine will, it was slaughter." Calder snorted. "Listen to him, getting soft over a few dead miners. They had families," Jace snapped. "Children." "Enough," Silas said quietly, but the word carried more weight than a shout. "What's done is done. The question now is what happens next." He turned his attention to Clara. "Mrs. Doyle, I must apologize for involving you in our family dispute, but perhaps it's fitting, given your late husband's involvement with our congregation." Clara stilled. "My husband had no dealings with outlaws." A smile played at the corners of Silas's mouth. "Is that what he told you?" Matthew was quite the storyteller. He sipped his coffee. "We rode together for years. Mrs. Doyle, he was one of us before he decided honest ranching suited him better." Calder had drifted to the small side table where Clara kept a framed photograph of her younger sister, Ellie. He picked it up, studying it with unseemly interest. "Well now, who's this pretty thing?" Clara fought the urge to snatch the photograph from his hands. "My sister. She lives back east." "Lovely," Calder murmured. "Must run in the family. Though I wonder if she knows what kind of legacy her brother-in-law left behind." He set the photograph down with exaggerated care. "Sins of the father, or husband in this case." "That's enough, Calder," Jace warned. The younger outlaw shrugged. "Unperturbed, just making conversation." "What my impetuous young colleague means," Silas interjected smoothly, "is that your husband left certain obligations unfulfilled when he departed this world, obligations that, I'm afraid, now fall to you as his widow." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "My husband left nothing but debts and unanswered questions. Whatever business you had with him died when he did. If only matters of the soul were so easily settled." Silas set down his cup and leaned forward, all pretense of cordiality slipping away. "Matthew took something that belonged to our fellowship, something of considerable value. We've come to reclaim it, with interest." "I don't know what you're talking about," Clara said truthfully. "I believe you." Silas's pale eyes seemed to look through her rather than at her. Matthew was cautious that way, but the debt remains regardless of your knowledge. He gestured to the ranch around them. This land will serve as collateral until arrangements can be made. This is my home, Clara protested. You can't just... We can, Mrs. Doyle, Silas interrupted gently. We can and we will. Consider it an act of mercy that we're not demanding immediate payment in full. He stood, adjusting his coat. We'll be staying for a time. I trust you'll accommodate us with the same hospitality you've shown Brother Jace. Jace stepped forward. Silas, she has nothing to do with this. Let me settle whatever Matthew owed. Noble, Silas remarked, but premature. You're still recovering from your disagreement with Brother Calder here. He glanced at the younger man, who smirked. For now, we'll all remain as guests of the widow Doyle, while matters are arranged to everyone's satisfaction. The finality in his tone made Clara's blood run cold. She was trapped in her own home, surrounded by killers, with no way to call for help. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and Deputy Reeve rarely patrolled this far from town unless specifically called. I'll need supplies from town soon, she said, grasping at any potential escape. Food, ammunition. Make a list, Silas instructed. Calder can accompany you when the time comes. No chance of slipping away then. Clara nodded, rage and fear battling within her. She caught Jace's eye across the room, a wordless exchange that conveyed both apology and warning. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered. For now, survival meant compliance. I'll prepare rooms, she said, voice carefully controlled. One more thing, Mrs. Doyle. Silas's tone stopped her at the doorway. Should you be considering any ill-advised actions, remember this. What happened in Silver Bluff can happen anywhere, even to a lone widow on an isolated ranch. The threat hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. Clara nodded once, then escaped to the back bedroom, her mind racing with desperate calculations. They'd taken her home, threatened her life, invoked Matthew's name to claim what was hers, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed her to be a helpless widow, beaten down by circumstance. They didn't know that since Matthew's death, Clara had been preparing for the worst. Secret caches of ammunition hidden throughout the property, escape routes memorized, provisions stored, where only she could find them. She might be trapped for now, but she wouldn't remain that way. As Clara gathered bedding for her unwelcome guests, she began to plan. Not escape, not yet, but resistance. They wanted to use her home? Fine. But they would soon learn that the Widow Doyle was not so easily conquered. 3 days passed, like a slow-moving nightmare. Clara watched her home transform under the occupation of Silas and his men, boots on her clean floors, weapons casually strewn across furniture, the constant stench of tobacco and unwashed bodies permeating spaces once filled with her solitary quiet. She moved through the house like a ghost, serving meals she was ordered to prepare, cleaning up messes she hadn't made, all while maintaining the careful veneer of reluctant submission. It was in the barn that Clara found rare moments of peace. Silas seemed to consider caring for animals beneath him, and the others showed little interest in mucking stalls or hauling water. Only Jace occasionally joined her there, his wound healing. Enough that he could assist with lighter tasks, despite Calder's sneering comments about playing farmhand. This morning, Clara entered the barn alone just after sunrise, breathing in the familiar smells of hay and horses with relief. Here, at least, things remained unchanged. The animals greeted her with soft, nickering sounds, eager for their morning feed. She moved through her chores with practiced efficiency, finding comfort in routine. As she forked fresh hay into the stalls, Clara's thoughts drifted to the previous night. She'd overheard Silas and Calder talking on the porch, their voices carrying through her partially open window. "The bank in Socorro," Silas had said. "Small enough to manage with limited resistance, large enough to be worth our while." "When?" Calder had asked, excitement evident in his tone. "Next week. We need time to scout properly." A pause, and for our wayward brother to decide where his loyalties truly lie. They'd been discussing Jace, Clara realized. His position in the gang seemed tenuous at best, caught between his long history with them and whatever moral awakening had led to his bullet wound and escape attempt. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled Clara from her thoughts. She tensed, then relaxed slightly upon recognizing Jace's measured tread. "Morning," he said quietly, leaning against the stall door. His face looked less drawn today, color returning to his features as the wound continued to heal. Clara nodded in acknowledgement, continuing her work. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep." Jace's eyes followed her movements. "How are you holding up?" "As well as can be expected with killers taking over my home," she replied evenly, not looking at him. Jace winced but didn't argue the point. "They won't stay forever." "No?" Clara finally met his gaze. "Your preacher seems quite comfortable, directing operations from my parlor." "He's not my preacher," Jace muttered. "Not anymore." Clara set down her pitchfork, studying him. "Yet here you are, still riding with them?" "It's complicated." "It always is with men like you," she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Was it complicated for Matthew too, when he rode with you all?" Something like regret flickered across Jace's features. "Matt was. He was good at seeing the angles, better than most of us." He picked up a brush and moved toward Rebels. Stall, his horse now recovered enough to stand without favoring its injured leg. "Good enough to betray Silas, apparently," Clara observed. "Is that what happened? Is that why Silas claims Matthew owed him?" Jace began brushing his horse in. "Long, careful strokes. You should ask Silas about that." "I'm asking you." Jace's hand stilled. After a long moment he said, "Matt took something that belonged to all of us. Money from a job, a big one, disappeared with it. By the time Silas tracked him down, he'd already bought this place and settled down. With me," Clara finished quietly. "With you," Jace agreed. Silas was furious, but Matt convinced him that having a legitimate rancher as an ally could be useful. A place to lay low when needed, someone to fence goods through legitimate channels. Clara felt cold despite the morning warmth. "And I never knew. All those times Matthew went to town for business, the unexpected visitors in the night." She shook her head. "I was blind. He wanted to keep you separate from all that," Jace said almost gently. "Protected." "Protected," Clara repeated. "And now look where his protection has left me." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats, the ranch hand from town who delivered mail once a week. Clara had nearly forgotten. It was delivery day. She moved quickly to the barn door, relief washing over her at the sight of a legitimate visitor. Perhaps she could pass him a note, or... Her hope died as Calder appeared from the house, intercepting the mailman before he could dismount. The two exchanged words, Calder's posture deliberately casual as he accepted the small bundle of mail. The mailman tipped his hat and turned his horse back toward town, unaware of the silent plea in Clara's eyes. Calder rifled through the letters. As he walked back to the house, his curiosity showing no regard for privacy, Clara watched, helpless, as her brief chance for outside contact disappeared. "I should get back," she said to Jace, gathering her tools, "before they wonder where I am." "Clara," Jace called softly as she reached the door, "be careful around Calder. He's unpredictable." "I've noticed," she replied dryly, thinking of the way Calder's eyes followed her through the house, the occasional accidental brushes against her when she served meals. Inside the house, Clara found Silas at her kitchen table, the mail spread before him. He looked up as she entered, holding a cream-colored envelope in his long fingers. "Correspondence from your sister," he remarked, offering the letter. "Ellie, isn't it? Such lovely handwriting." Clara took the envelope, fighting to keep her expression neutral, despite the violation of having this man handle her personal mail. "Thank you. Family is a precious thing," Silas continued, watching her closely. "Sacred bonds that should be cherished." The implied threat made Clara's fingers tighten around the envelope. She nodded stiffly and retreated to her bedroom, the one space the men had left largely to her, though she had no illusions about privacy. Sitting on the edge of her bed, Clara opened the letter with trembling hands. "Dearest Clara, I finally convinced Father to allow me to visit. It's been far too long since we've seen each other, and I miss you terribly. I'll be arriving on the afternoon stage to Broken Cross on the 15th. Please don't go to any trouble. Just the sight of you and some of that famous western sky you're always writing about will be celebration enough. All my love." Ellie. Clara pressed the letter to her chest, heart hammering with fear. The 15th, that was tomorrow. Her sister was walking straight into a nest of vipers, with no warning, no way to turn her back. She had to get back to the barn, had to think. Tucking the letter into her pocket, Clara composed herself and returned to the main room. Silas had disappeared, but Calder lounged in Matthew's chair, boots propped carelessly on a small table. "News from home?" he asked, feigning disinterest. "Just my sister checking that I'm well," Clara lied smoothly. "She worries." Calder's smile didn't reach his eyes. Thoughtful of her. Family should look after each other. He stood, moving closer than was necessary. "Like we do." Clara forced herself not to step back. "I need to finish the washing." "Always working," Calder observed, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. Clara flinched involuntarily. "You should rest more. Let us take care of you." His fingers lingered near her face, the implied claim in the gesture making Clara's skin crawl. Before she could respond, the door opened, and Jace stepped inside. His eyes took in the scene immediately, hardening as they settled on Calder's hand. "Silas is looking for you," he said to the younger outlaw, voice flat. Calder's hand dropped, but his smirk remained. "Always interrupting at the interesting parts, aren't you, Jace?" He turned to Clara with a mock bow. "We'll continue our conversation later, Mrs. Doyle." Once he'd gone, Clara released the breath she'd been holding. "Thank you." Jace nodded once, his expression grim. "Don't thank me yet. This situation is getting more dangerous by the day." He glanced toward the door. "I heard Silas and Calder talking about Socorro. They're planning something big." "I know," Clara said. "I overheard them too." She hesitated, then made a decision. "I need to show you something, in the barn." They slipped out together, careful to appear casual. In the barn, Clara led Jace to the back wall, where loose boards concealed a small space between the interior and exterior walls. "I found this the day after Matthew died," she explained, prying one board loose to reveal a hidden compartment. "He kept some of his secrets here." From the space, Clara withdrew a dust-covered leather journal. "There are more," she said, but this one mentions Silas the most." Jace took the journal with obvious surprise. "Matt kept records. That doesn't sound like him." "Not records," Clara corrected. "More like thoughts, plans." She watched as Jace opened the journal, flipping through pages covered in Matthew's distinctive scrawl. He wrote about the heists, the money, and about how he planned to leave it all behind. Jace's brow furrowed as he read. "He was planning to betray Silas again," he murmured. "Take the rest of the money and run. Further this time. California. Maybe." "He was scared," Clara said quietly. "Those last weeks. I'd never seen him like that. Jumping at shadows, drinking too much." She crossed her arms, hugging herself against the memory. "Now I understand why." Jace closed the journal, expression troubled. If Silas finds this— He won't, Clara said firmly, taking the journal back and returning it to its hiding place. But I needed you to see it, to understand what's at stake. I do understand, Jace said, better than you know. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. This Socorro job, it's going to be bloody. Silas isn't just after money anymore. He wants to make a statement. And you don't agree? No, Jace said simply. I don't. Clara studied him, weighing her next words carefully. My sister is coming. Tomorrow. She doesn't know about any of this. Jace's eyes widened. You have to stop her. How? Clara demanded. The mail's already gone. I can't leave the ranch without an escort. She paced the small space between stalls. If Ellie arrives and sees this situation, Calder will take an interest, Jace finished grimly, and Silas will see another piece to play against you. Clara stopped pacing, meeting Jace's gaze directly. I need your help. Before Jace could respond, voices approached the barn, Silas and Calder, their conversation carrying through the still morning air. Getting soft, Calder was saying. First Silver Bluff, now this. Brother Jace isn't the man he once was. Faith wavers, Brother Calder, Silas replied, his tone measured. It's our duty to guide him back to the path. Clara and Jace exchanged alarmed glances. They'd been gone too long, attracted notice. Quickly, Clara grabbed a nearby pitchfork and thrust it into Jace's hands, just as the barn door swung open. Silas surveyed the scene with knowing eyes. Clara and Jace, standing too, close, the sudden flurry of pretended work. His pale gaze missed nothing. There you are, Brother Jace, he said smoothly. I was beginning to worry you'd forgotten our morning devotional. His attention shifted to Clara, and Mrs. Doyle, so diligent with her chores. Admirable. Calder's gaze was less measured, sweeping over Clara with open appreciation before hardening as it settled on Jace. The tension between the two men crackled like heat lightning. Just helping with the horses, Jace said, voice carefully neutral. Indeed. Silas's small smile didn't reach his eyes. Come, brother, we have matters to discuss. As Jace reluctantly followed Silas from the barn, Calder lingered, his posture blocking Clara's path to the door. Getting friendly with our wounded warrior, Mrs. Doyle. His tone carried a dangerous edge beneath its casual surface. Clara met his gaze steadily. Mr. Colton understands horses. I appreciate the help. I'm sure you do. Calder stepped closer. But take care. Jace's loyalties are complicated these days. Wouldn't want you putting faith in the wrong man. His smile sharpened. Again, the threat hung in the air as he turned and sauntered from the barn, leaving Clara alone with the enormity of her predicament. Her sister was coming tomorrow, walking into grave danger with no warning. Her home was occupied by killers, and her only potential ally was a man caught between his past and whatever conscience had recently awakened within him. Clara leaned against the barn wall, clutching Ellie's letter through the fabric of her pocket. She had less than 24 hours to prepare for her sister's arrival and find some way to protect her from the devil who had made himself at home in Clara Doyle's life. Clara spent the morning in a frenzy of quiet preparation, straightening the house with nervous energy. To anyone watching, she appeared to be readying for a guest, which was true enough. What they couldn't see were the small precautions. The derringer hidden beneath the guest room mattress, the kitchen knife tucked into a slit she'd cut in the bottom of the settee, the spare bullets rolled inside a pair of stockings in the dresser drawer. Expecting someone? Calder asked, lounging in the doorway as Clara changed sheets in the small room that had once been Matthew's study. Clara smoothed the quilt with forced calm. My younger sister visits occasionally. Just being prepared in case she decides to come. The half-truth felt clumsy on her tongue, but Calder merely smiled that wolfish smile of his, apparently accepting her explanation. Family resemblance. Does she have it? If she's half as handsome as you, Mrs. Doyle, she'll be a welcome addition to our little gathering. Clara's hands stilled on the quilt, dread pooling in her stomach. Before she could respond, Jace appeared behind Calder. "Silas wants us all outside," he said flatly. "Planning meeting for Socorro." Calder's eyes lingered on Clara a moment. Longer, before he shrugged and sauntered away. Jace remained in the doorway, his expression troubled. "You need to delay her somehow," he said in a low voice once Calder was out of earshot. "I can't," Clara replied, equally quiet. "She'll arrive on today's afternoon stage. There's no way to reach her." Jace ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Then we need to get you both away from here before what?" Silas's smooth voice interrupted from the hallway. "A private conference, Brother Jace?" Clara busied herself with the pillowcase, heart hammering against her ribs. Jace turned to face Silas with remarkable composure. "Just telling Mrs. Doyle we'll need extra supplies for the journey to Socorro," he replied easily. "Bandages and such." Silas studied them both, his pale eyes missing nothing. "Thoughtful of you, but perhaps our hostess would prefer to join us outside for our discussion. After all, her hospitality has been instrumental to our preparations." It wasn't a request. Clara set down the pillowcase and followed the men outside, where the other gang members had already gathered in the yard. The discussion about the Socorro bank robbery lasted nearly an hour. Specific details about guard rotations, timing, escape routes. Clara absorbed it all silently, filing away information that might prove useful. "And what role will I play in this?" she finally asked when there was a lull in the planning. Silas smiled, the expression never touching his eyes. "You, Mrs. Doyle, will remain here. Insurance, if you will, for our safe return." The implication was clear. She was as much hostage as host. Clara nodded, her face carefully blank, despite the fury building inside her. As the meeting broke up, Jace caught her eye briefly, a silent communication passing between them. They were running out of time. The sound of an approaching wagon reached them just after 2 o'clock. Clara was in the kitchen, mechanically kneading bread dough, when she heard it. Her head snapped up, flour-dusted hands freezing mid-motion. Too early. Ellie wasn't supposed to arrive until the late afternoon stage. One of the outlaws, a quiet, bearded man called Harris, appeared in the doorway. "Someone's coming." Silas materialized behind him, adjusting his coat with casual precision. "Are we expecting visitors, Mrs. Doyle?" Clara wiped her hands on her apron, mind racing. "It might be a neighbor," she lied. Pete Rawlins, from the next property, sometimes brings extra milk when his cows are producing too much." The excuse sounded thin even to her own ears, but there was no time to craft anything better. Through the window, she could now see the wagon, approaching, a hired rig from town, with a slender figure in a blue traveling dress seated beside the driver. Ellie. There was no mistaking that bright copper hair, even from a distance. "Appears to be a woman," Silas observed mildly, "young from the look of her." Clara abandoned any pretense. "It's my sister. She must have caught an earlier stage than expected." "How delightful," Silas replied, his tone making the words sound like anything but. "A family reunion. Calder will be pleased." The name sent a chill through Clara. "Please," she said, lowering her voice. "She knows nothing of this situation. She's innocent." Something like amusement flickered across Silas's face. "Innocence is such a temporary state, Mrs. Doyle. But I understand your concern." He straightened his collar. "We'll present ourselves as what you suggested earlier, ranch hands hired to help the widow manage her property, a reasonable explanation for our presence." It was the best Clara could hope for under the circumstances. She nodded her agreement just as the Wagon pulled up before the house. Ellie jumped down before the driver could assist her, all vibrant energy and beaming smile. At 23, she was the image of their mother, tall and willowy with that striking copper hair and a spray of freckles across her nose. She wore a fashionable traveling suit in Robin's egg blue, the skirt slightly dusty from the journey. "Clara!" she called, waving enthusiastically. Clara plastered on a smile and hurried down the porch steps, meeting her sister in a fierce embrace. For a moment, reality fell away. There was only Ellie's familiar scent of lavender water and the comforting squeeze of her arms. "I caught an earlier stage," Ellie explained breathlessly as they separated. "I was so eager to see you, I couldn't bear to wait in town for the afternoon run." Her bright gaze moved past Clara to the house, where Silas stood watching from the porch. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." Clara kept her arm around Ellie's waist, as if she could physically shield her from what was to come. "Ellie, these are the ranch hands I've hired to help me manage things." She gestured vaguely. "Mr. Maddox is the foreman." Silas descended the steps with his most charming smile, removing his hat in a gesture of courtesy that would have seemed genuine to anyone who didn't know better. "Miss Ellie," he greeted, taking her gloved hand lightly. "Your sister has mentioned you. We're pleased to make your acquaintance." Ellie blushed slightly at his formal manner, clearly charmed. "How kind of you to help Clara. This ranch is too much for one person, as I've told her repeatedly." The wagon driver unloaded Ellie's trunk and carpet bag, accepted his payment, and departed with a tip of his hat. As the sound of his wheels faded down the road, Clara felt as if her last connection to safety went with him. The other men had emerged from the house, lingering in the yard with transparent curiosity. Jace stood apart from them, his expression guarded as he watched the scene unfold. Calder, however, moved forward with undisguised interest, eyes traveling over Ellie's slender form with an appreciation that made Clara's skin crawl. "Miss Ellie," he drawled, hat in hand, "Calder Boone. A pleasure to meet Matthew Doyle's sister-in-law at last." Ellie offered her hand with the easy confidence of a girl raised in good society. "Mr. Boone, you knew Matthew?" "Oh, yes," Calder replied, holding her hand perhaps a moment too long. "Matt and I were close, weren't we, Jace?" Jace stepped forward, his posture deliberately casual, though Clara could see tension in the set of his shoulders. "Miss Ellie, welcome to the ranch. Your sister's been looking forward to your visit." Something in his tone, a warmth lacking in Calder's oily charm, made Ellie smile genuinely. "Thank you, Mr. Colton. Jace Colton." Clara watched the exchange with growing unease. Even in this brief interaction, the contrast between the two men was stark. Calder's predatory interest versus Jace's controlled courtesy. Ellie, raised in the protected environment of their father's eastern home, might not recognize the danger behind Calder's smiles, but she wasn't completely naive. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Let's get you settled," Clara said quickly, guiding Ellie toward the house. "You must be tired from your journey." "Not at all," Ellie replied cheerfully. "I'm full of energy and questions. Father will want to know everything about how you're managing the ranch." Inside, Clara helped Ellie with her bags, hyper-aware of the men's voices drifting through the open windows. They were talking and laughing with forced normality, maintaining the charade of being legitimate ranch hands. "They seem like an interesting group," Ellie remarked as she unpinned her hat. "Though not what I expected of ranch hands. Mr. Maddox speaks like a schoolteacher." Clara busied herself with opening the window, buying time to compose her response. "They're experienced men from all walks of life." Ellie nodded, unpacking her carpet bag with neat efficiency. "And that young one, Calder, seems quite attentive. she laughed lightly. "He barely took his eyes off me." "Ellie," Clara said carefully, sitting on the edge of the bed, "about the men here. It might be best if you were cautious around them, particularly Calder." Ellie paused in her unpacking, looking up with sudden seriousness. "Clara, is everything all right? You seem tense." "I'm fine," Clara lied, forcing a smile. "Just surprised by your early arrival. I wasn't prepared." "Since when do you care about being prepared for me?" Ellie asked, her perceptiveness cutting through Clara's facade. "We used to sleep in the same bed when I visited before. Now suddenly you're worried about having the guest room ready." Before Clara could formulate a response, a knock at the door interrupted them. Silas stood in the doorway, apologetic smile firmly in place. "Forgive the intrusion, ladies," he said smoothly. "But I wonder if Miss Ellie might join us for an early supper. We've taken the liberty of preparing something special to welcome our guest." Ellie beamed, completely taken in by his courtly manner. "How thoughtful. Of course I'll join you." Clara had no choice but to follow them to the kitchen, where the outlaws had indeed laid out a surprisingly appetizing meal. Someone had found a dusty bottle of wine from the cellar, a remnant of Matthew's more prosperous days, and Calder was uncorking it with flourish. "To family reunions," Silas toasted once they were all seated, raising his glass, "and new friendships." As glasses clinked, Clara caught Jace watching her across the table, his expression unreadable. Beside her, Ellie chatted animatedly, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension flowing beneath the veneer of normalcy. "Tell us about yourself, Miss Ellie," Calder urged, refilling her wineglass without being asked. "A pretty girl like you must have suitors lined up back east." Ellie blushed. "Hardly that. Father is very particular about who calls at the house." "Protective," Silas observed, cutting his meat with precise movements. "As fathers should be. Don't you agree, Mrs. Doyle?" The weight of his gaze made Clara's meaning clear, a reminder that Ellie's safety now depended entirely on Clara's cooperation. "Yes," she managed, setting down her fork. "Families should protect each other." Later, as darkness fell and the men moved to the porch with their cigarettes and whiskey, Clara finally found a moment alone with Ellie in the kitchen. "Something's wrong," Ellie said immediately, dropping all pretense. "These aren't ranch hands, are they? What's happening, Clara?" The directness of the question left Clara momentarily speechless. She'd underestimated her sister's perception. "It's complicated," she began, keeping her voice low. "They're—" The back door swung open, cutting off her explanation as Jace stepped inside. His eyes darted between the sisters before settling on Clara. "Silas wants to see you," he said quietly, "on the porch." Clara nodded, squeezing Ellie's hand reassuringly before following Jace outside. Silas stood alone at the far end of the porch, smoking contemplatively as he gazed out at the darkening land. "Your sister is charming," he said without turning, refreshingly direct, unlike so many young ladies these days. Clara said nothing, waiting for whatever was coming next. "She's also a liability," Silas continued, finally facing her. "Unless, of course, she becomes an asset. Another reason for you to ensure our endeavor in Socorro proceeds smoothly." The implication was clear. Clara's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Leave her out of this. That depends entirely on you, Mrs. Doyle." Silas tapped ash from his cigarette. "Ensure Jace's continued cooperation, maintain your hospitality, and your sister will leave here as innocent as she arrived." "And if I don't?" Silas smiled thinly. "Let's just say Calder has been lonely for female companionship. He seems quite taken with young Ellie." The threat hung in the air between them like gun smoke. Clara felt sick, the weight of both her sister's safety and Jace's wavering loyalty now squarely on her shoulders. "Have I made myself clear, Mrs. Doyle?" Clara's voice was barely audible. "Perfectly." Inside, she found Ellie waiting anxiously in the kitchen. Over her sister's shoulder, Clara caught a glimpse of the stagecoach schedule pinned to the wall, and beside it, a blank sheet of paper and a pencil. A desperate plan began to form in her mind. Clara rose before dawn, moving silently through the house where Silas and his men slept. In the dimness, she navigated by memory, avoiding the creaking floorboard outside Matthew's old study, the loose hinge on the kitchen door. She'd spent half the night composing and recomposing the note in her mind, weighing each word for its potential consequences. The paper lay where she'd hidden it, folded beneath the coffee tin. Clara wrote quickly, her handwriting deliberately altered, "Deputy Reeve, suspicious men at Doyle Ranch. Possibly the gang you've been tracking. Please investigate carefully. Well armed, no signature, nothing that could be traced directly back." To her, if the note fell into the wrong hands, she sealed it in a small envelope and tucked it into her pocket. Ellie was still asleep in the guest room, her face peaceful in repose. Clara closed the door softly, torn between fear for her sister's safety and gratitude for her presence. Ellie's unexpected arrival had complicated matters immeasurably, but it had also given Clara something she'd been missing for months, a reason to fight back, rather than merely survive. Outside, the ranch was shrouded in pre-dawn stillness. Clara made her way to the barn, under the pretext of early chores, where she found Jace already awake, saddling his horse. "Going somewhere?" she asked quietly, startling him. Jace turned, his expression unreadable in the lantern light. "Just checking fences, Silas's orders, keeping up appearances." "Convenient." Clara moved to Pepper's stall, running a hand along the mare's velvet nose. "I need to get into town today, for supplies. Calder will want to go with you." "I know." Clara met his gaze steadily. "But I'd rather it was you." Something shifted in Jace's eyes. Wariness, perhaps, or curiosity. "Why?" "Because you have reason to keep both me and my sister safe." Clara kept her voice low, aware of how sound carried in the early morning quiet. "And because I believe you're having second thoughts about the Socorro job." Jace said nothing for a long moment, his hands stilling on the saddle girth. "What makes you think that?" "I've been watching you," Clara replied simply. "The way you tense when Silas talks about necessary casualties, the distance you keep from Calder. You're a man standing on the edge of a decision, Mr. Colton." A muscle worked in Jace's jaw. "Even if that were true," he said carefully, "what difference would it make? Silas has 4 armed men here. Your sister's safety hangs by a thread. And you're a woman alone, with no allies." "Not entirely alone." Clara held his gaze. "Not if you help me." Before Jace could respond, footsteps sounded outside the barn. Calder appeared in the doorway, his expression darkening as he took in the scene before him. "Awful early for a private conversation," he remarked, hand resting casually near his holster. "Silas was wondering where you'd gotten to, Jace." "Checking. Fence lines," Jace replied evenly, gesturing to his saddled horse. "Mrs. Doyle needed to discuss supplies for the kitchen." Calder's eyes narrowed, but he seemed to accept the explanation. "Well, Silas wants to see you. Both of you," he added, his gaze lingering on Clara with that now familiar predatory interest. The day unfolded with agonizing slowness. Clara prepared breakfast for the unwanted guests while Ellie chattered cheerfully, still believing the men were legitimate ranch hands. Silas maintained the charade with practiced ease, deferring to Clara as the lady of the house, while simultaneously reminding her with subtle glances and comments of the power he held over her family's safety. By mid-morning, Clara had nearly forgotten her note to Deputy Reeve, consumed as she was with keeping Ellie occupied and away from Calder's increasingly bold attentions. They were hanging laundry in the yard when the sound of an approaching horse drew everyone's attention. "Someone's coming," Ellie remarked, shading her eyes against the sun. Just one rider. Clara's heart leapt to her throat as she recognized the straight-backed posture and dust-colored hat of Deputy Thomas Reeve. Her note had reached him. Silas appeared on the porch, seemingly unconcerned. "Company, Mrs. Doyle. One of your neighbors." "Deputy Reeve," Clara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "From Broken Cross." Something cold flickered across Silas's features before his customary mask of civility settled back into place. "Is that so? Well, we wouldn't want to alarm a representative of the law, would we?" He turned to call over his shoulder, "Boys, we have a visitor. Look respectable." The transformation was remarkable. By the time Reeve dismounted in the yard, Silas's men had arranged themselves in poses of innocent industry, Harris splitting. Wood, another man sweeping the porch, Calder nowhere to be seen. Only Jace remained apart, watching from the corner of the house with cautious attention. Deputy Reeve was a tall, austere man in his late 30s, with a weathered face and eyes that missed little. Those eyes now swept over the scene with professional assessment before settling on Clara. "Mrs. Doyle," he greeted, removing his hat. "Been a while." "Deputy," Clara acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you out this way?" Reeve's gaze flicked to Ellie, then to Silas, standing at a respectful distance. "Just routine patrol, checking on outlying properties." The lie sat easily on his tongue. "Heard you might have some new hands working the place." So he had received her note. Clara felt a flicker of hope, quickly tempered by the knowledge that Silas was watching her every move. "Yes," she said carefully, "Mr. Maddox and his men have been a great help." Silas stepped forward, offering his hand with an easy smile. "Silas Maddox, Deputy. Pleased to meet you. We're just helping the widow keep this place running until she decides what to do with it long term." Reeve shook the offered hand, his expression betraying nothing. "That right? Mighty generous of you." "Mrs. Doyle was kind enough to give us employment when we needed it," Silas replied smoothly. "The least we can do is help her maintain her late husband's legacy." At the mention of Matthew, something hardened in Reeve's gaze. There was history there. Clara had always suspected as much, though Matthew had never spoken of it. "Would you care for some coffee, Deputy?" Ellie offered brightly, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents. "I just made a fresh pot." "Much obliged, miss," Reeve said with a polite nod. Inside the house, Clara felt the walls closing in around her. What had she expected? That Reeve would ride up, recognize Silas and his gang immediately, and arrest them all on the spot? The deputy was alone, outnumbered, and clearly suspicious, but uncertain. As Ellie busied herself with the coffee, Reeve drew Clara aside. His voice pitched low. "Everything all right here, Mrs. Doyle? Some talk in town about strangers in the area." "Everything's fine," Clara replied, too aware of Silas lingering by the door, just within earshot. "As you can see," Reeve studied her, skepticism evident in his gaze. "Your husband kept interesting company before he died," he said, the words barely above a whisper. "Hope you're not following in his footsteps." Clara stiffened. "I am nothing like Matthew. For your sake, I hope that's true." Reeve accepted the coffee Ellie offered, never taking his eyes from Clara's face. "Because this territory's changing. Law's getting stronger. The sort of arrangements Matthew had with certain elements won't be tolerated anymore." Silas chose that moment to approach, his smile never reaching his cold eyes. "Deputy Reeve, I couldn't help overhearing. You knew Matthew Doyle." "We had dealings," Reeve replied curtly. "Professional ones." "I understand completely," Silas said with a knowing nod. Matthew was a man who appreciated the complexities of frontier justice, a pragmatist. The two men regarded each other with thinly veiled mutual assessment. Clara could almost see the calculations running behind Reeve's eyes, weighing suspicions against evidence, possibilities against practicalities. "Well," Reeve said finally, setting down his empty cup, I should continue my patrol. Much obliged for the coffee, Miss Ellie. Clara followed him onto the porch, desperate for a moment, alone with the lawman. Deputy, don't, Reeve cut her off quietly. Whatever you're involved in, Mrs. Doyle, be careful. The law can't help those who don't help themselves. His gaze hardened. And if I find out you're harboring outlaws knowingly, I won't be able to look the other way, not even for Matthew's widow. You could lose this ranch. I'm doing what I can, Clara whispered urgently. Something like reluctant sympathy softened Reeve's features momentarily. I know what it's like to be caught between bad choices, Mrs. Doyle, but there are some men you don't want to cross. His eyes flicked toward the house. And some you don't want to trust. With that cryptic warning, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Clara standing on the porch with the distinct feeling that her last hope of outside help had just disappeared. With him, Silas joined her a moment later, his voice pleasant but eyes cold as winter. An interesting man, your local deputy. Not entirely convinced of our honest intentions, I think. He has no reason to suspect otherwise, Clara replied evenly. Indeed, Silas studied her profile. Though I wonder what might have drawn him out here today, of all days. A conscience visit to check on the widow Doyle. His fingers closed around her wrist, gentle but inescapable. Or something else. Clara met his gaze steadily. Perhaps he's sweet on Ellie. Many men are. The deflection worked. Silas's attention shifted to the question of the deputy's possible interest in the younger sister, a complication he hadn't considered. His grip loosened. If Reeve becomes too curious, Mrs. Doyle, it could create difficulties for all of us, including your sister. The threat, as always, was delivered with perfect courtesy. I trust you understand. Perfectly, Clara replied. As Silas returned inside, Jace approached from where he'd been watching the exchange. That was risky, he said quietly. What was? The note you sent Reeve. At her startled expression, he added, I saw you slip it to the mailboy yesterday when you thought no one was looking. Clara felt cold fear wash through her. Are you going to tell Silas? No. Jace's answer came without hesitation. But Reeve wasn't much help, was he? No, Clara admitted. I'm on my own. Not entirely, Jace said, so softly she almost didn't hear it. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw something she hadn't expected, regret, and the first glimmers of resolve. I never meant for them to come here, he continued. Never meant for you or your sister to be caught in this. It was as close to an apology as she was likely to get. Clara studied him, weighing his sincerity against her desperate need for an ally. Then help me get them out, she whispered. Jace glanced toward the house, where Silas's shadow moved across the window. How? A plan had been forming in Clara's mind since dawn. Dangerous, potentially catastrophic, but possibly their only chance. They trust each other about as much as rattlesnakes in a sack, she said. Maybe it's time to shake that sack a little. Understanding dawned in Jace's eyes, followed by wary respect. You're suggesting we turn them against each other? Precisely, Clara straightened her shoulders. Decision made. Silas prizes loyalty above all else. What happens when he thinks his trusted men are betraying him? It's risky, Jace warned. If they catch on, then we're no worse off than we are now, Clara finished grimly. But if it works, we might just survive this. As they spoke, Calder appeared in the doorway, his suspicious gaze finding them immediately. Another private conversation? He called. Careful, Jace. A man might think you're getting sweet on the widow. Jace's face betrayed nothing, but Clara felt his resolve solidify beside her. With the smallest of nods, he confirmed his participation in her desperate gambit. The trap was set. Now they just had to spring it. Part 7. Poison in the Water. Clara moved about her kitchen with deliberate calm, kneading bread dough with more force than necessary. Beside her, Ellie chattered about town life back east, seemingly oblivious to the tension that filled the house like smoke. It had been 2 days since Deputy Reeves' visit, 2 days of careful planning and waiting for the right moment. That moment had arrived. "Could you fetch more flour from the pantry, Ellie?" Clara asked, wiping her hands on her apron. As her sister disappeared into the small storage room, Clara quickly withdrew a folded paper from her pocket and tucked it beneath a stack of plates, its corner just visible. Calder slouched in moments later, helping himself to coffee with the entitled air he'd adopted since arriving. His eyes followed Ellie's movements in the pantry with undisguised interest. "Mr. Boone," Clara acknowledged stiffly, "is there something you need?" "Just enjoying the view, Mrs. Doyle," he replied with a smirk, leaning against the counter beside her. His gaze dropped to the stack of plates where the corner of the note peeked out. "What's this?" Before Clara could respond, he'd plucked the paper free. Her heart hammered against her ribs as he unfolded it, scanning the contents with narrowing eyes. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, voice suddenly hard. Clara feigned confusion, glancing at the note as if seeing it for the first time. The forged message was brief but damning. "Jace, Socorro's not worth the risk. Silas has lost his way. We should take our share and go before it's too late." No signature, but the implication was clear. "I found it yesterday while sweeping." She lied smoothly. "I assumed it was trash and meant to burn it." Calder's eyes darted to the doorway, where Ellie was returning with the flour. "Did Jace give you this?" he pressed. "No," Clara replied truthfully. "I have no idea who wrote it." Calder folded the note and tucked it into his own pocket, his expression thunderous. "Don't mention this to anyone," he ordered. "Especially not Silas." Clara nodded, allowing a touch of fear to show in her expression. "Of course not." The first seed was planted. Throughout the day, Clara continued her subtle campaign. When Silas inquired about his missing pipe, the carved cherrywood one he prized, Clara mentioned offhandedly that she'd seen Calder near Silas's things earlier. Later, while Jace helped her carry water from the well, she asked innocently whether the Socorro job was worth the risk, echoing the phrasing from the forged note in a voice just loud enough to carry to where Harris was chopping wood nearby. By evening, the atmosphere in the house had shifted perceptibly. Calder watched Jace with open suspicion. Harris seemed reluctant to speak freely around either of them, and Silas, ever observant, clearly sensed the disquiet among his men. Clara served dinner with quiet efficiency, saying little as conversation ebbed and flowed around her. Ellie, picking up on the strained atmosphere, attempted to fill the silence with cheerful anecdotes about life back east. Only Silas responded with his usual smooth courtesy, though his pale eyes remained watchful. After the meal, Clara slipped, away to the barn, ostensibly to check on the horses. The night was cool and clear, stars pricking the vast expanse of sky above the ranch. In the darkness, she felt both vulnerable and strangely empowered. This plan was hers, its success or failure resting squarely on her shoulders. She had just finished placing Silas's missing pipe in Calder's saddlebag when footsteps sounded behind her. Clara spun around, heart in her throat. Jace stood in the barn doorway, his silhouette framed against the night sky. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly. Clara straightened, refusing to appear guilty. "What needs to be done?" He moved closer, his expression becoming visible in the dim lantern light. "You're playing a dangerous game, Clara. I've seen Calder watching you, seen the way he's been eyeing me since this morning." "Good," Clara replied firmly. "Let him be suspicious. Let them all question each other." Jace studied her, something like reluctant admiration in his gaze. "You're cleverer than Matt ever gave you credit for." "Matthew never saw me as anything," But a convenient wife, Clara said, surprised by the lack of bitterness in her own voice. A pretty face to come home to, not a mind to reckon with. And that was his mistake. Jace moved to stand beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. Silas won't make the same one. If he suspects what you're doing, he'll kill me, Clara finished matter-of-factly. But if I do nothing, my sister and I are still at his mercy. At least this way, we have a chance. Jace said nothing for a long moment. Then, with a sigh of resignation, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. If we're doing this, we should do it properly. He emptied several gold coins into his palm, the distinctive double eagles that Clara had seen the outlaws using. For poker, these were in Silas's coat, but Calder has been eyeing them for days. Clara stared at him, understanding dawning. You've been creating your own discord. A ghost of a smile touched Jace's lips. Like you said, what needs to be done? Together, they tucked the coins deep into Harris's bedroll, where they would be discovered the next time he packed his things. As they worked, Clara sensed a shift between them, a partnership forged in desperation, but growing into something more substantial. For the first time since Matthew's death, she felt less alone. They returned to the house separately, careful not to be seen together. Inside, Clara found Ellie in their shared bedroom, her face pale and troubled. "What's wrong?" Clara asked, instantly alert. Ellie sat on the edge of the bed, fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "I overheard them talking, Clara. Calder and that big man, Harris." Her voice trembled slightly. "They're not ranch hands, are they?" Clara closed the door quietly, heart sinking. She had hoped to shield Ellie from the truth a while longer. "No," she admitted softly, "they're not. They were arguing about money and someone named Jace betraying them." Ellie looked up, eyes wide with dawning comprehension. "They mentioned killing people in a place called Silver Bluff. They're outlaws, aren't they? And we're—" "What? Hostages?" Clara sat beside her sister, taking Ellie's cold hands in her own. "I was trying to protect you from knowing. By letting me behave like a fool." Tears welled in Ellie's eyes. "Chattering away, serving coffee to men who might kill us both." "I was trying to find a way out," Clara explained urgently. "Jace, the one with the blue eyes, he's helping me. We're turning them against each other." Ellie stared at her, shock and something like horrified admiration crossing her features. All those little comments at dinner. That was deliberate. Clara nodded. "And it's working. They're beginning to suspect each other." "What about that man, Silas? He watches everything." Ellie shuddered. "The way he looks at us, like we're pieces on a chessboard." "That's exactly what we are to him," Clara agreed grimly. "But even the cleverest player can be distracted." A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside their door, silencing them both. After a tense moment, footsteps moved away. Clara released the breath she'd been holding. "What do we do now?" Ellie whispered. "We continue as before," Clara instructed. "You act as if you still believe they're ranch hands. I'll create more discord, and if an opportunity arises to get word to Deputy Reeve again—" Ellie nodded, a new determination hardening her previously soft features. "I can help. They don't watch me as closely as they watch you. Especially Calder. He thinks I'm just a silly girl." Clara squeezed her sister's hands. "It's dangerous, Ellie." "So is doing nothing," Ellie replied, echoing Clara's earlier words to Jace. In that moment, Clara saw her younger sister transformed, the sheltered Eastern girl giving way to a woman of strength and resolve. It pained her to see Ellie's innocence stripped away, yet she couldn't deny the fierce pride that accompanied the realization. The next morning brought unexpected developments. Clara descended to the kitchen at dawn to find Silas already there, drinking coffee with uncharacteristic tension, evident in his posture. "Good morning, Mrs. Doyle," he greeted, his usual smooth courtesy strained. I trust you slept well. Well, enough, Clara replied cautiously, moving to the stove. Curious things have been happening, Silas continued, watching her over the rim of his cup. Items misplaced. Conversations overheard that perhaps weren't meant for certain ears. His pale eyes never left her face. One might almost think someone was attempting to create disharmony. Clara kept her expression neutral as she measured coffee grounds. Your men seem restless. Perhaps the isolation of ranch life doesn't suit them. Perhaps. Silas set down his cup with deliberate precision. Or perhaps they're being influenced by outside forces. Clara turned to face him directly, refusing to be intimidated despite the cold fear crawling up her spine. What are you implying? Mr. Maddox? Merely observing Mrs. Doyle? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Change is coming, whether we welcome it or not. Before Clara could respond, the door burst open. Calder stormed in, face flushed with anger, Silas's cherrywood, pipe clutched in his hand. Someone put this in my saddlebag, he snarled, tossing the pipe onto the table, trying to make me look like a thief. Silas's eyebrows rose slightly as he picked up his missing pipe. Indeed, how peculiar. His gaze shifted between Calder and Clara, calculating. And who would benefit from such mischief, I wonder? The tension in the room thickened as Jace appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with wary assessment. Behind him stood Harris, hand resting near his holster, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Something wrong? Jace asked, his casual tone belied by the alertness in his stance. Nothing that concerns you, Calder snapped, unless you're the one planting things where they don't belong. Jace's eyes flicked to Clara momentarily before returning to Calder. Sounds like you're accusing me of something, Calder. Want to spell it out? Clara held her breath as the two men squared off. This was exactly what she'd hoped to provoke, division within the gang. Yet now that it was happening, the danger seemed suddenly, terrifyingly real. Silas rose from his chair, commanding attention with his mere presence. Enough, he said quietly. This bickering serves no purpose. We have more important matters to attend to. He turned to Clara, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Doyle, it seems our hospitality has reached its natural conclusion. We'll be riding out tomorrow at dawn. Relief flooded through Clara, quickly, followed by suspicion. All of you? All of us, Silas confirmed with a thin smile. Including you and your charming sister. I'm afraid the Socorro opportunity requires your, participation. Cold dread replaced Clara's momentary hope. We're not going anywhere with you. I'm afraid you don't have a choice in the matter, Mrs. Doyle. Silas's tone remained pleasant, but his eyes were hard as flint. Consider it a family outing. Your presence will ensure that certain parties remain cooperative. His gaze shifted meaningfully to Jace. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Clara and Ellie weren't just leverage against each other. They were insurance against Jace's wavering loyalty. Silas had seen through their alliance, perhaps even their attempts to sow discord. As if reading her thoughts, Silas added softly, Poison in the water affects everyone who drinks, Mrs. Doyle, even those who poured it. Clara met his gaze unflinchingly, though her heart pounded with fear. Her plan had worked too well, or not well enough. Either way, the consequences were now barreling toward them like a runaway train. Pack only what's necessary, Silas instructed, turning away. Dawn comes early. After he'd gone, Clara exchanged a desperate glance with Jace. Their plan had failed. Tomorrow they would be forced from the relative safety of the ranch into the unknown dangers of the open road, headed for a robbery that would likely end in bloodshed. And Clara knew with bone-deep certainty that once Silas no longer needed her or Ellie, their lives would be worth nothing. Midnight found Clara in the barn. The lantern turned low as she pried loose the floorboard concealing Matthew's journals. The household had finally settled into uneasy silence after hours of preparation for tomorrow's departure. Silas had assigned Harris to guard the porch, but Clara had slipped out through her bedroom window, trusting the darkness and her intimate knowledge of the property to shield her movements. Her fingers closed around the leather-bound volumes, so cool and solid in her grasp. For months she'd avoided reading them fully, glimpsing only enough to confirm that her husband had led a double life. The pain of his betrayal had been too raw, the truth too difficult to face. But now, with Dawn promising a journey from which she and Ellie might never return, Clara needed answers and leverage. "What are you doing out here?" She startled at Jace's voice, nearly dropping the journals. He stood in the shadowed doorway, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I could ask you the same," Clara replied, clutching the books to her chest. Jace moved closer, eyes fixed on the objects in her hands. "Those are Matt's," he said softly. "His journals." Clara nodded, surprised by his recognition. "You knew he kept them." "He always did, even when we rode together," said writing helped him think clearly. Jace's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. Silas called it his weakness, leaving evidence. Matt called it his insurance. Clara considered him for a moment, then made her decision. "I need to show you something." She gestured toward the back of the barn, where a small tack room offered privacy and distance from the house. Inside the cramped space, surrounded by the comforting smells of leather and horse liniment, Clara spread the journals on an old trunk. 5 volumes spanning 8 years, a chronicle of Matthew's life before and during his marriage to her. "I never read them all," she admitted, "just enough to know." Her voice trailed off. "To know he wasn't who you thought," Jace finished, quietly. Clara nodded, throat tight with emotion. "But there's more here, things about Silas, about you, about money that went missing." She opened the most recent journal to a page she'd marked with a scrap of fabric. "Read this." Jace took the book reluctantly, as if it might burn him. His eyes scanned the page, narrowing as he absorbed Matthew's neat, precise handwriting. "March 12th. S. Plans the Carson City job for next month. Expects 20K or more. My chance to be free of this life finally within reach. J. Suspects nothing, still loyal to a fault. The others follow S blindly. None of them see how unhinged he's becoming with his talk of divine retribution. When the shooting starts, and with S, it always does, I'll disappear with what I can carry. They'll suspect the bank employee, the one S has been threatening. Perfect scapegoat." Jace looked up, his face pale in the lantern light. "This can't be right." "Matt wouldn't." Clara turned to another marked page from a few weeks later. April 3rd. Done. 17K in my possession, the rest scattered in the confusion. S shot the teller. Unnecessary bloodshed, as always. J tried to prevent it, poor fool. His conscience will be the death of him if he stays with S much longer. In the chaos, I slipped away as planned. They'll assume I was killed or captured. By the time they learn differently, I'll be established elsewhere with a new life. C is the perfect cover, a respectable wife for a respectable rancher. She suspects nothing of my past. Better that way. "There's more," Clara said softly, watching. Pain and disbelief wore on Jace's features. Entry after entry, detailing how he used the stolen money to buy this ranch, how he manipulated Silas when he was eventually found, how he... Her voice faltered. "How he married me as a shield against his past." Jace closed the journal, his hands unnaturally still. "All these years," he murmured, "Silas told us Matt was ambushed, that he barely escaped with his life, that the money was taken by one of the bank guards." He looked up at Clara, raw hurt in his eyes. "I believed him. mourned for Matt, hated those nameless guards for years. And then Matthew contacted Silas again, Clara prompted, after we were married. Jace nodded slowly. Out of the blue, a letter arrived. Matt was alive, settled, married, claimed he'd been hiding from the law all this time. His laugh held no humor. Silas was furious, but also impressed. Said Matt had shown true devotion to the cause by sacrificing himself, going underground to establish a safe haven for the gang, while keeping most of the money for himself, Clara added bitterly. Silas suspected as much, but could never prove it. Matt was too clever, had too many explanations. Jace ran a hand through his hair. That's why Silas kept him close but separate, using this place when needed, but never fully trusting Matt again. Clara turned to another entry, dated just weeks before Matthew's death. S grows suspicious. Demands more than I can give, without raising C's questions, threatens exposure, must find a way to silence him permanently. The canyon trail offers possibilities, isolated, dangerous in bad weather. A tragic accident would surprise no one. Jace stared at the words, shock evident on his face. Matt was planning to kill Silas? He looked up at Clara, but instead, Matthew died in that canyon, Clara finished quietly, neck broken in a fall from his horse. You think Silas? I think Silas recognized the threat and acted first. Clara closed the journal, suddenly weary beyond words. Matthew was planning murder, Jace. My husband, the man I loved, was calculating how to kill a man in cold blood. The admission hung between them, raw and painful. Clara had never spoken it aloud before, had barely allowed herself to acknowledge it in the privacy of her own thoughts. I'm sorry, Jace said softly. Clara looked up, surprised by the genuine compassion in his voice. For what? That you had to learn this way? That Matt used you as cover for his schemes? Jace hesitated. That I brought this danger back to your door. You didn't know they would follow you here, Clara said. I should have. Jace's expression hardened. I knew Silas would never let betrayal stand. I just thought... He trailed off, shaking his head. That you'd be the only one to pay the price, Clara finished for him. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the occasional stamp of a horse in its stall and the distant hoot of an owl. Clara felt strangely unburdened, as if sharing Matthew's secrets had lifted a weight she'd carried alone for too long. Why did you stay with them? She asked finally. With Silas, after Silver Bluff, after whatever happened there turned your stomach. Jace considered the question, his gaze distant. Fear, at first. Silas doesn't tolerate deserters. Then habit, I suppose. He looked down at his hands. It's been my life for so long, I couldn't imagine another. And there was loyalty, misplaced as it was. He gave a bitter laugh. Loyalty to a man who would put a bullet in me without hesitation if it served his purpose. And now? Clara pressed. Now? Jace met her eyes, something resolute forming. In his expression, now I see clearly for the first time in years. Matt betrayed us all, you, me, even Silas. He caused deaths that can't be undone, told lies that shaped all our lives. He reached for the journal, fingers tracing Matthew's handwriting. But his lies end here, tonight. Clara felt tears sting. Her eyes, not for Matthew, not anymore, but for the strange, fierce connection forming between herself and this man who had once been her husband's friend, then her captor, and now, improbably, her ally. What happens at dawn? She asked quietly. Silas plans to take you and Ellie to Socorro as leverage against me and as potential hostages during the bank robbery. Jace's voice was grim. He doesn't trust me anymore, suspects I might try to warn the authorities or back out at the critical moment. Would you? Clara asked. Warn them? Jace hesitated, conflict evident in his features. A week ago, no, now. He looked at her directly. I can't let him use you and Ellie that way. Can't be part of another silver bluff. What happened? There, Jace, Clara asked softly. What turned you against them? Pain flashed across his face. We were supposed to hit the mining company payroll. Clean job, minimal risk. But Silas, he swallowed hard. Silas decided to make an example of the foreman who'd refused to cooperate. Had Calder bring the man's family to watch. Children Clara, barely older than 10. His voice grew distant. I tried to stop it. That's when Calder shot me, on Silas's orders, though he made it look like an impulse. Clara closed her eyes, briefly sickened. And you still thought you could ride with them after that? I thought I could control the damage, steer them toward less bloody work. Jace's laugh was hollow. Arrogance, maybe, or just another lie I told myself to avoid facing what I've become. Clara stood abruptly, gathering the journals. These won't help us now. They're just echoes of a dead man's schemes. She moved toward the small stove in the corner of the room, used for heating horseshoes in winter. A few coals still glowed beneath the grate. It's time to let the past burn. One by one, she fed Matthew's journals into the stove, watching as the pages curled and blackened, his secrets turning to ash. As the last volume caught fire, Clara felt tears on her cheeks, not of grief but release. I loved him, she said quietly. Despite everything, I loved him. What does that say about me? Jace moved to stand beside her, his shoulder almost touching hers as they watched the flames. That you have a capacity for love that Matthew never deserved, he replied simply. The words washed over her like a benediction, dissolving the last chains of guilt and confusion that had bound her since Matthew's death. Clara turned to face him fully, suddenly aware of how close they stood, of the warmth radiating from his body in the cool night air. Dawn comes soon, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. What are we going to do? Determination hardened Jace's features in the flickering light. Something that should have been done long ago, he said. Break free. As the last of Matthew's journals crumbled to ash, Clara felt something new kindling in its place. Not hope exactly, too fragile to name yet, but a fierce resolve to fight. For her future, for Ellie's safety, for the chance at a life unburdened by the sins of the past. What neither of them saw was the shadow that briefly darkened the small window behind them, a figure watching, listening, before slipping away into the night. The hour before dawn cast the ranch in ghostly shades of grey. Clara moved silently through her bedroom, shaking Ellie gently awake. Her sister's eyes flew open, instantly alert, the innocence of sleep replaced by wary understanding. It's time, Clara whispered, pressing a finger to her lips. They dressed quickly in their simplest clothes, sturdy skirts, boots, and shawls. Against the desert chill, Clara had prepared small packs containing water, jerky, and the few practical valuables she could carry. The derringer from beneath the mattress was tucked securely in her pocket, its weight both reassuring and terrifying. "Where's Jace?" Ellie whispered as they crept toward the kitchen. "Creating our diversion," Clara replied, praying silently that his plan would work. Outside, the pre-dawn darkness still held sway, but the faintest lightning showed along the eastern horizon. Harris sat dozing on the porch, rifle across his knees, Silas's appointed sentry. The other men slept inside, scattered throughout the house in strategic positions to block any escape, all except Calder, who had drawn the early morning watch in the barn. Clara guided Ellie toward the rear of the house, hearts pounding, as a floorboard creaked beneath their feet. Harris shifted but didn't wake. 5 more steps, then they were outside, pressed against the weathered planks of the house, breathing the cool dawn air. "Remember the route?" Clara asked. Ellie nodded. "The dry arroyo behind the stable, then along the ridge to Widow's Canyon. If we get separated, keep moving north toward Broken Cross." Clara squeezed her sister's hand. "Deputy Reeve will help you, whatever his feelings about me." A sudden, muffled sound from the barn caught their attention, the dull thud of a body hitting the ground. Clara tensed, counting seconds. 1 minute passed, then another. Finally, Jace emerged from the barn doorway, Calder's revolver tucked into his belt beside his own. He crossed to them swiftly, face grim in the growing light. "Calder's secured," he said in a low voice. "Tied up and gagged. It won't hold him long once he wakes. Harris?" Clara gestured toward the porch. "I'll handle him. You two start for the arroyo." Jace's hand brushed Clara's arm, the touch brief but steadying. "I'll catch up once I've delayed them." Clara hesitated, struck by the sudden irrational fear that this was the last time she would see him. "Be careful." Something softened in Jace's eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Go," he urged. "Now." Clara grabbed Ellie's hand, and they slipped away, keeping low and using the outbuildings for cover as they made their way toward the dry creek bed that cut behind the stable. The sky continued to lighten, shadows receding with each passing minute, exposing them to potential discovery. They had just reached the edge of the arroyo when a shout erupted from the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. "Run!" Clara hissed, pushing Ellie ahead of her into the sandy trench. They scrambled down the steep bank, boots sliding on loose dirt. The arroyo offered concealment, but also danger. Its meandering path was the most direct route from the ranch to Widow's Canyon, but also a potential trap if Silas and his men guessed their destination. Behind them, more shouts echoed across the ranch yard. Clara risked a glance back as they rounded a bend in the creek bed. Figures moved urgently around the house, Harris clutching his arm, Silas striding from the porch with cold purpose, the fourth outlaw whose name Clara had never learned emerging from the barn, presumably having discovered Calder. Of Jace, there was no sign. "Keep moving," Clara urged, turning her attention forward again. They ran as best they could through the sandy bottom of the arroyo, its high banks offering protection from sight but not from pursuit. The dry watercourse twisted through the landscape, deepening as they progressed until the walls rose nearly 8 feet above their heads. The sound of hoofbeats reached them, distant at first, then growing louder with alarming speed. "They're on horseback," Ellie gasped, face pale with fear. Clara grabbed her sister's arm, pulling her toward a narrow side channel that split off from the main arroyo. "This way." The smaller gulch offered worse footing but better concealment, its winding path barely wide enough for a horse to navigate. They pushed forward, breath coming in ragged gasps, the eastern sky now painted with the fiery colors of sunrise. A rifle shot cracked above them, bullet striking the dirt wall inches from Clara's head. She instinctively shoved Ellie down, covering her sister's body with her own as dirt and rock fragments showered over them. "There they are," a voice called, the fourth outlaw now visible on the rim of the arroyo behind them. He raised his rifle for another shot. Before he could fire, another gunshot rang out from a different direction. The outlaw jerked backward, clutching his shoulder, his own shot going wild. "Keep going," Jace's voice carried to them from somewhere above. "I'll hold them off." Clara pulled Ellie to her feet, and they stumbled forward, the sounds of gunfire erupting behind them as Jace exchanged shots with their pursuers. The narrow gulch opened suddenly into a broader wash, and Clara realized with a jolt that they'd reached the edge of Widow's Canyon, the place where Matthew had died. "The trail is up there," she said, pointing to a barely visible path that switchbacked up the canyon wall. "It's our only way across." Ellie stared at the steep ascent, then back the way they'd come. "What about Jace?" "He'll find us," Clara said with more confidence than she felt. "Come on!" They had just started up the trail when hoofbeats thundered into the wash behind them. Clara turned to see Silas himself, mounted on his large black horse, with Harris riding close behind. Both men had rifles raised. "Mrs. Doyle," Silas called, his voice carrying the same measured courtesy that had always chilled Clara's blood. "This excursion has gone far enough, don't you think?" Clara pushed Ellie behind her, shielding her sister with her body as she faced the outlaws. "Let us go, Silas. You have no claim on us." "On the contrary," Silas nudged his horse forward, "your husband's debts remain unsettled, and now you've added the sin of treachery to your account." His pale eyes were colder than Clara had ever seen them. "Where is Brother Jace?" As if, in answer, a shot rang out from the canyon rim. Harris cried out, dropping his rifle as blood blossomed on his thigh. Silas wheeled his horse, scanning the heights for the shooter. "Run!" Clara urged Ellie, shoving her sister toward the trail as she drew the derringer from her pocket. They scrambled upward, feet slipping on the loose, rocky surface. The path was barely wide enough for one person, forcing them to climb in single file with Ellie in the lead. Behind them, Silas shouted orders to Harris, who had dismounted and taken cover behind a boulder, clutching his wounded leg. Clara risked a glance back as they reached the first switchback. Silas had also dismounted, rifle braced against his shoulder as he fired methodically at the canyon rim, where Jace must be positioned. The disciplined, unhurried way he worked the weapon was more terrifying than any wild barrage would have been. A movement caught her eye. The fourth outlaw had appeared at the mouth of the gulch they'd fled through, bleeding but mobile. He raised his pistol, aiming not at the canyon rim, but directly at Clara and Ellie on the exposed trail. "Down!" Clara screamed, pulling Ellie with her behind a slight outcropping of rock. Bullets whined off stone around them, showering them with sharp fragments. Clara returned fire with her derringer, the small weapon almost useless at this distance, but forcing the outlaw to seek cover. More shots echoed from above, and Clara looked up to see Jace working his way down a nearly vertical section of the canyon wall, using one hand to control his descent while firing his revolver with the other. His face was a mask of dirt and sweat, blood staining his left sleeve where a bullet had found its mark. "Keep climbing!" he shouted when he saw Clara looking his way. "Get to the top!" Clara pushed Ellie forward, staying close behind her as they continued their ascent. The trail grew even narrower, hugging the canyon wall with a sheer drop on the other side. Below, Silas had directed his attention to Jace, firing with methodical precision as the younger outlaw scrambled from one precarious position to another. They were 3/4 of the way up when disaster struck. A bullet from Silas's rifle hit the trail just ahead of Ellie, shattering the already unstable edge. With a scream, Ellie lost her footing, sliding toward the precipice. Clara lunged forward, grabbing her sister's wrist with desperate strength. For one heart-stopping moment, Ellie dangled over the void, her weight threatening to pull Clara over with her. Then Clara braced her boot against a rock outcropping and heaved backward with every ounce of strength she possessed. Ellie tumbled onto the narrow path, gasping and sobbing. "I can't," she choked out. "Clara, I can't do this." "Yes, you can," Clara insisted, pulling her sister upright. "We're almost there." A shout from below drew their attention. The fourth outlaw had worked his way to the base of the trail and was starting up after them, revolver in hand. Silas continued to fire at Jace, who had reached a position about halfway down the canyon wall, still returning fire despite his wound. "Go!" Clara urged, pushing Ellie ahead. "I'm right behind you." They resumed their climb, painfully exposed. On the narrow path, the outlaw below gained ground quickly, his longer stride eating up the distance between them. Clara glanced back, judging the rapidly closing gap, and made a swift decision. "Keep going," she told Ellie. "Don't stop for anything." Before her sister could protest, Clara had turned to face their pursuer, derringer raised. She waited until he rounded the switchback, putting him directly below her position. then fired her remaining shot. The bullet went wide, striking Rock inches from the outlaw's head. He laughed, the sound ugly with triumph as he raised his own weapon. "Bad shot, Mrs. Doyle," he called. "You won't get another." Clara backed away, empty derringer still pointed at him, as if it could offer protection. Her heel struck a loose stone on the trail, nearly sending her over the edge. The outlaw advanced, taking his time now that he knew she was unarmed. "Silas wants you alive," he said, but he didn't specify undamaged. A flurry of movement caught Clara's eye. Ellie, who had doubled back instead of continuing upward. Her sister stood on the trail just above them, hefting a rock the size of a small melon. Before Clara could speak, Ellie had hurled it with all her strength. The rock struck the outlaw squarely in the chest, momentarily staggering him. He recovered. Quickly, fury replacing his earlier smugness as he swung his revolver toward Ellie. Without thinking, Clara launched herself at him, driving her shoulder into his midsection. The impact sent them both toward the edge of the trail. For one suspended moment, Clara felt nothing beneath her feet, only the outlaw's hands clawing at her as they began to fall. Then a hand seized her arm, yanking her back onto solid ground with bruising force. Jace. He had somehow worked his way to their position, arriving just in time to catch Clara. The outlaw wasn't so fortunate. His scream echoed briefly as he plummeted into the canyon, ending with a sickening finality that Clara knew would haunt her dreams. "Are you hurt?" Jace demanded, his face inches from hers, eyes wild with fear and exertion. Clara shook her head, unable to speak. Ellie collapsed beside them, trembling violently. "We need to move," Jace urged, helping them both to their feet. "Silas is still down there, and he won't—" A shot rang out, the bullet striking Jace high, in the back. He staggered forward, expression shocked as he fell to his knees on the narrow trail. "Jace!" Clara screamed, catching him before he could slide over the edge. Below them, Silas stood at the base of the trail, rifle braced against his shoulder for another shot. "An admirable effort, Brother Jace," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air, "but ultimately futile." Blood spread across Jace's shirt, his face pale with shock and pain. "Go!" he gasped, trying to push Clara away. "Both of you get to the top." "Not without you," Clara insisted, hooking her arm under his shoulder. Ellie moved to his other side, working together with Clara to lift him. "Up!" she commanded with newfound authority. "One step at a time." Another shot cracked against the rocks above their heads as they struggled upward, Jace's weight nearly impossible to manage on the treacherous path. His breathing grew labored, each step clearly agony, but he continued to move, summoning reserves of strength that left Clara in awe. They reached the canyon rim as the sun cleared the horizon, bathing the landscape in golden light. Before them stretched a broad mesa dotted with mesquite and scrub brush, offering little in the way of cover, but at least removing the immediate danger of the precipitous trail. Jace collapsed the moment they reached level ground, blood soaking through his shirt and dripping onto the dusty earth. Clara tore strips from her petticoat, pressing them against the wound in his back while Ellie kept watch for Silas. "He's coming up the trail," Ellie reported, voice tight with fear. "Alone." "Now, how far?" Clara asked, not looking up from her desperate work on Jace's wound. "Halfway, moving steadily." Ellie touched Clara's shoulder. "We won't outrun him, not with Jace injured." Clara knew she was right. Even if they abandoned Jace, something she refused to consider. They were on foot in open country, miles from help. Silas would hunt them down at his leisure. Jace stirred, his eyes finding Clara's. "My gun," he whispered. "Take it." Clara hesitated, then accepted his revolver, checking the chambers. 3 bullets remained. "You've never killed a man," Jace said softly, reading her thoughts. "I've never had to before," Clara replied, her voice steadier than she expected. Ellie moved beside her, face set with grim determination. "Look," she said, pointing to a feature Clara hadn't noticed in their desperate flight, a narrow opening. In the rocks about 50 yards distant, barely visible among the mesquite. "Could be a cave," Hope flickered. "Help me lift him," Clara directed. Together they half-carried, half-dragged Jace toward the opening, his boots leaving twin trails in the dust. Each step was agonizingly slow, and Clara could feel warm blood seeping through her makeshift bandages, soaking into her own clothing. Behind them, Silas would be reaching the canyon rim at any moment. The opening proved to be the mouth of a small cave, its interior cool and shadowed. They managed to get Jace inside just as Ellie gasped. "He's up! I can see his hat clearing the rim." Clara positioned herself at the cave entrance, Jace's revolver steady in her hand. From this vantage, she had a clear view of the canyon edge and the figure now standing upon it. Silas paused, scanning the mesa with methodical attention, rifle ready. "He hasn't seen us yet," Clara whispered, pressing back deeper into the shadows. "The mesquite might be hiding our tracks." Inside the cave, Ellie worked on Jace's wound, using water from their small canteen to clean away blood and dirt. His breathing was shallow but steady, his eyes closed in either unconsciousness or exhaustion. Clara couldn't tell which. "The bullet went through," Ellie reported quietly, "but he's lost so much blood." Clara nodded, not taking her eyes from Silas's distant figure. He had begun moving across the mesa, following a path that would take him perilously close to their hiding place. His pale eyes swept the landscape with the patience of a predator, accustomed to waiting for prey to reveal itself. "If he finds us here, we're trapped," Ellie whispered. Clara knew she was right. The cave offered temporary shelter, but no escape route. Once Silas discovered them, it would become their tomb. Jace stirred, his eyes opening to focus on Clara, with surprising clarity. "Let me have the gun," he said, voice weak but determined. "Get ready to run when I draw him off." "You can barely stand," Clara protested. "Exactly why it has to be me." Jace's hand closed weakly around hers. "This was always going to end in blood, Clara. I've accepted that, but you and Ellie deserve a future." Tears stung Clara's eyes. "I won't leave you to die." "You won't." A ghost of his wry smile touched his lips. "I'm harder to kill than that." Before Clara could argue further, movement caught her eye. Silas had changed direction, heading straight for their hiding place with purposeful strides. He'd found their trail. "He's coming," Clara breathed, raising the revolver. Jace struggled to sit up, grimacing with pain. "Wait," he urged. "Let him get closer. One shot, make it count." Clara's finger tensed on the trigger as Silas approached, his tall figure growing more distinct with each step. 50 yards, 40, 30. Close enough now that she could see the cold calculation in his eyes, the confident set of his shoulders. He clearly believed the advantage was his. "Steady," Jace whispered beside her. "Wait for it." 20 yards. Silas paused, head tilting slightly as his gaze fixed on the cave entrance. A slow smile spread across his face. He'd spotted them. "Mrs. Doyle," he called, his voice carrying across the intervening space with that same courteous menace. "I believe this game has reached its conclusion. 10 yards, rifle raised and ready." "Now," Jace breathed. Clara squeezed the trigger. Clara's bullet caught Silas in the shoulder, spinning him backward with the impact. His rifle discharged harmlessly into the ground as he staggered, momentarily stunned by the unexpected resistance. It was enough time for Clara to drag Jace deeper into the cave, Ellie scrambling after them as Silas's enraged roar echoed across the mesa. "You've only made it worse for yourselves," he shouted, voice stripped of its usual controlled courtesy. "There's nowhere to run." The cave extended further than they'd initially realized, its narrow entrance widening into a larger chamber. Weak light filtered through fissures in the rock ceiling, revealing ancient pictographs on the walls, silent witnesses to their desperate stand. "He'll bleed out," Jace murmured, leaning heavily against the rock wall. His face was ashen in the dim light, but his eyes remained clear and focused. Or he would, if he were an ordinary man. "What do we do now?" Ellie whispered, helping. Clara eased Jace to the ground. Clara checked the revolver, 2 bullets left, not enough to hold off a determined Silas for long. "We wait," she said, her voice calmer than she felt. "Night's coming. The darkness might give us an advantage." As if in confirmation, the thin beams of light slanting through the cave ceiling began to fade, the sun sinking toward the western horizon. Outside they could hear Silas moving around, his footsteps deliberate as he assessed the cave's entrance. "Quite the predicament you've created, Mrs. Doyle," his voice carried from outside, once again cultivating that unnerving veneer of civility. "Brother Jace appears to be in dire need of medical attention. The nearest doctor is in Broken Cross. Quite a journey, even for someone who isn't bleeding profusely." Clara didn't respond, knowing he was trying to bait them into revealing their position within the cave. Beside her, Jace's breathing had grown more labored, his skin clammy with shock. Ellie worked silently, tearing more fabric from her petticoat to replace the blood-soaked bandages. "I admire your resourcefulness," Silas continued conversationally. "Matthew chose better than he knew, it seems. A woman of spirit rather than merely ornament." The mention of Matthew sent a sharp pang through Clara's chest. Not grief this time, but anger. Even now, her husband's ghost seemed to linger between her and freedom, his choices shaping the nightmare they were living. Darkness fell fully, bringing a chill that seeped through the rock walls. They huddled together for warmth, Jace drifting in and out of consciousness as the hours crawled by. Clara kept the revolver ready, ears straining for any sound from outside. Occasionally she heard movement, a boot scraping on stone, the soft clink of metal, reminders that Silas remained, patient as a spider. "Clara," Ellie whispered sometime near midnight, her voice barely audible. "I think I found something." She gestured toward the back of the cave, where the darkness seemed even more absolute. There might be another way out, a tunnel or passage. Hope flared briefly. "Are you sure?" "No," Ellie admitted, "but I felt a breeze. Air has to be coming from somewhere." Clara hesitated, reluctant to leave their position near the entrance, where at least they could see any approach. But Jace's condition was deteriorating, his skin burning with fever despite the cool night air. They needed to get him to a doctor, and soon. "Stay with him," she instructed Ellie. "I'll check." Keeping her back to the wall, Clara edged deeper, into the cave, one hand extended to feel her way through the absolute darkness. The floor sloped downward slightly, the air growing damper. Her fingers encountered a narrow fissure in the back wall, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but definitely there. A soft sound behind her made Clara whirl, revolver raised. Nothing but shadows. Then a voice spoke directly, beside her. "Your sister has a gift for finding escape routes," Silas said quietly. "Unfortunately, so do I." Cold metal pressed against Clara's temple, the barrel of Silas's pistol. She froze, heart hammering in her chest as she realized her fatal mistake. While they'd watched the cave entrance, Silas had found another way in. "Don't make a sound," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear, "or the girl dies first." With a firm hand on her arm, he guided her back toward the main chamber, where moonlight now filtered through the ceiling cracks, casting pale illumination over Ellie's terrified face and Jace's still form. "Now then," Silas said, stepping away from Clara, but keeping his pistol trained on her, "let us have a proper reckoning." Blood had soaked through the bandage on his shoulder, but he showed no sign of weakness or pain. In the silvery moonlight, he looked almost spectral, a vengeful prophet come to deliver judgment. "You've cost me dearly, Mrs. Doyle," he continued, his voice returning to that disconcertingly reasonable tone. 4 good men, valuable time, the Socorro opportunity likely lost. He sighed, as if genuinely disappointed. All for what? A futile grasp at freedom from debts that were never yours to deny. Matthew's debts died with him, Clara said, voice steadier than she expected. Silas smiled thinly. Debts of the soul are not so easily discharged, my dear. Matthew took what belonged to our fellowship, used it to build this life you've clung to so desperately. He gestured dismissively. This ranch, your respectable widowhood, all purchased with blood money. I knew nothing about that, Clara countered. Ignorance doesn't absolve responsibility. Silas's pale eyes gleamed in the darkness. We reap what others sow, Mrs. Doyle. That's the divine economy of things. Ellie shifted slightly, drawing Silas's attention momentarily. Clara tensed, calculating the distance between them, the chance of reaching him before he could fire. Don't, Silas warned, reading her intent. Heroics would only leave your sister alone with me. I don't think either of us wants that. Clara forced herself to relax, mind racing desperately for options. The revolver was tucked into her waistband at the small of her back, hidden by her shawl, but useless, while Silas held them at gunpoint. What is it you want? She asked, playing. For time. Originally, merely what was owed. Now? His smile chilled her blood. Retribution. Examples must be made, Mrs. Doyle. Order must be maintained. By killing us, Clara challenged. That won't restore what Matthew took. No, but it will deter the next brother, Jace, who considers betrayal. Silas glanced at Jace's prone form. He could have been my right hand. Instead, he chose sentiment over loyalty, weakness over strength. Conscience, Clara corrected. He chose conscience. Silas's expression hardened. A luxury we cannot afford in this world. He gestured with his pistol. On your knees, Mrs. Doyle, your sister too. Clara didn't move. No. Something dangerous flashed in Silas's eyes. This is not a negotiation. No, it isn't, Clara agreed, standing her ground. It's over, Silas. Whatever hold you had on Matthew, whatever power you think you have over me, it ends here. Bold words from a woman at gunpoint, Silas observed, a trace of genuine amusement in his voice. Matthew never mentioned your courage. Perhaps he never recognized it. Matthew saw what he wanted to see, Clara replied, the truth of it settling into her bones. A decorative wife, a convenient cover. He never looked deeper. She took a deliberate step forward. His mistake. Silas's pistol didn't waver. And this? This defiance in the face of certain death? Is that courage or merely foolishness? Neither, Clara said. It's certainty. You've already decided to kill us. Nothing I say or do will change that, so I choose to face it standing, not kneeling. Something like respect flickered across Silas's features. Would you like to hear a truth about your husband before you die, Mrs. Doyle? A final revelation? There's nothing you could tell me about Matthew that would surprise me now, Clara said quietly. Not even that he begged for his life at the inn. Silas smiled coldly at her involuntary flinch. Oh yes, I was there that day in the canyon. Matthew had grown troublesome. Too many schemes, too many little betrayals. It was time for a reckoning. He shrugged his uninjured shoulder. He wept, Mrs. Doyle, offered to return the money, offered you in his place. Anything to save his precious skin. Pain lanced through Clara's chest. Not for the husband she'd thought she had, but for the woman she'd been, believing herself loved by such a man. I arranged it to look like an accident, of course, Silas continued. A professional courtesy to a former brother. His body was found, given a proper burial. No awkward questions. He raised the pistol to align with Clara's forehead. You won't receive the same consideration, I'm afraid. The desert will claim what remains. Behind Silas, movement caught Clara's eye, a shadow detaching from the deeper darkness at the back of the cave. Jace, somehow on his feet, moving with silent determination despite his wound. "Any final words, Mrs. Doyle?" Silas asked, his finger tightening on the trigger. Clara met his gaze directly. "Matthew died a coward," she said clearly. "But I am not Matthew." Ellie's sudden, piercing scream startled Silas, breaking his concentration for the crucial second Jace needed. He slammed into Silas from behind, his remaining strength channeled into one desperate lunge. The pistol discharged, the bullet striking rock inches from Clara's head as both men crashed to the ground. Clara didn't hesitate. She drew Jace's revolver and aimed at the struggling figures, waiting for a clear shot. Jace had managed to knock the pistol from Silas's hand, but the older man's greater strength was quickly overcoming Jace's wounded desperation. "Move!" Clara shouted. With a final effort, Jace rolled away, leaving Silas exposed. The gang leader reached for his fallen weapon, a snarl contorting his features. Clara squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the cave, deafeningly loud in the confined space. Silas jerked backward, a look of genuine surprise crossing his face as blood blossomed on his chest. His fingers, inches from his pistol, twitched once and went still. For a moment, no one moved. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mingling with the metallic scent of blood. Then Ellie was beside Clara, gently taking the revolver from her shaking hand. "Is he—" Clara couldn't finish the question. Ellie knelt cautiously beside the fallen outlaw, checking for signs of life. "Yes," she confirmed, voice steady despite the paleness of her face. "He's dead." Clara moved to Jace, who had collapsed again after his heroic effort. Blood soaked through his makeshift bandages, his breathing shallow but determined. "Stubborn fool," she murmured, cradling his head in her lap. "You should have stayed down." A ghost of his familiar wry smile touched his lips. "And miss your moment of triumph? Not a chance." His hand found hers, squeezing weakly. "He was right about one thing, though." "What's that?" "Matthew never saw who you really were." Jace's blue eyes held hers with surprising clarity. "He never knew your strength." Something tight and painful in Clara's chest eased at his words, a knot of doubt and inadequacy she hadn't realized she still carried. She thought of Matthew's ghost, which had seemed to haunt every corner of her life since his death. The weight of his betrayal, his secrets, his debts that had nearly destroyed her. Now, looking at Silas's body, Clara felt that ghost finally fade. Matthew's legacy of lies had died with the man who shared them. "Dawn's coming," Ellie observed, peering toward the cave entrance, where the faintest lightning had begun to show in the eastern sky. "We need to get Jace to a doctor." Clara nodded, decision crystallizing. "Help me get him up. We'll use Silas's horse." Together, they managed to get Jace to his feet, his arms draped across their shoulders as they guided him slowly toward the cave entrance. Outside, the pre-dawn air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Silas's big black gelding stood ground-tied where he'd left it, watching their approach with wary eyes. Clara soothed the animal with quiet words as Ellie helped Jace lean against a boulder. "What about—" Ellie gestured back toward the cave, unable to speak Silas's name. "We'll tell Deputy Reeve," Clara decided. "Let the law handle it now." Jace made a sound that might have been a weak laugh. "Reeve won't shed tears over Silas's death, but he'll have questions for all of us." "Let him ask," Clara replied, helping him mount the horse with Ellie's assistance. "I'm done with secrets." As the sun crested the horizon, bathing the landscape, in golden light, Clara took the horse's reins and began the long walk toward Broken Cross. Behind them, the cave stood silent, holding the last remnants of Matthew's betrayal and Silas's vengeance. Ahead lay uncertainty, legal complications, and difficult explanations, but also, perhaps, freedom. Clara glanced up at Jace, noting the determination in his pain-lined face. Then at Ellie walking steadily beside her, no longer the naive girl who had arrived at the ranch just days ago. They had all been transformed by fire, tested and tempered in ways none of them could have anticipated. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.